bill with allowing people without concealed carry permits to come into schools. I don't want anyone in our schools who does not have the training of a police officer. For example, as you see in my letter, a recruit for the police academy has to go through 106 hours of firearms training. I want that much consideration given for anyone who's going to have a gun in our schools. And the reason I say that to show by example is that there was a study done of New York City officers where they actually studied actual incidents where they fired their guns at civilians, at people they considered threats, and the police officers only hit their targets 30% of the time, and when it came down to an actual gunfight, when their lives were actually on the line, it was 18%. So the thing is, I don't want someone who's in our school to have who may not practice. I'm sure many people here tonight do practice on a regular basis, but they're not qualified. They're not certified like a police officer is. That is what I want to see. And finally, I just want to close that the research shows, which I cite in my letter, actually shows that concealed carry permits actually increase injury and death from accidental shootings, and that is why I don't think we should have any guns in our schools except for peace officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Yale? Senator Lombardi.
Thank you. I just want to welcome Jeff. Jeff has the second hardest job in the state of Rhode Island on the school committee. I served 6 years on the school committee in Cranston, but the hardest job is obviously Judiciary Committee.
Yeah. Though I do have to clarify one thing though. Cranston East is the best high school in the state.
Not getting me in that.
We're not starting that. There are a lot of people in here tonight. Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Randall Rose, Jose Correa, and Mike Reed. Mr. Rose, we'll start with you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I usually do not speak on gun bills. This is the first time I've ever spoken on a gun bill, but I do think it's a complex issue, but I am speaking very strongly against the red flag gun bill 2492. Because I think the way it's drafted has considerable flaws. The bill is phrased in terms of extreme risk. That's the official name of the court order. But in terms of the legal language, the order is issued even if there is no extreme risk to the alleged gun owner or to anyone else. In fact, the law says, if this bill passes, it says that the alleged gun owner, the respondent, has to have the order issued against them, even if nobody in the court thinks they're a danger to anybody else, and even if there's just a suspicion that there's a significant risk to themselves, which may not be an extreme risk. All that's needed is a significant risk. So the bill says that when there's a significant risk to oneself or others, the order has to be issued. And the standard of proof for it is pretty weak as well. They don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody is a danger. It's simply whatever the judge finds to be clear, convincing evidence. But more importantly, besides the standard of proof, is that the grounds that the order is based on are left very vague and bring in a lot of potentially extraneous issues. If this was a bill about about taking away people's guns when they've actually made threats, then I would think that's a great idea. I would not be against that. But what the bill the bill actually sets out a pretty wide range of criteria that the judge is supposed to consider in issuing this order. The judge is told to look at the respondent's mental health history, to look at the respondent's alcohol use or drug use, so, for example, some judges do not like people who use drugs or even legal medical marijuana, but the judge is asked to consider that in issuing the order. As the ACLU has pointed out, the way the bill is written, even political rhetoric could be considered a threat and grounds for taking away a person's guns. But I haven't even gotten to the worst part, because even though there's a variety of enumerated criteria, such as whether the person has purchased a gun recently, or whether the person drinks alcohol, or whether the person has ever seen a psychologist, or whatever their mental health history is, the judge is actually allowed to issue the order if none of those criteria is true, because the bill says that the judge can use any grounds that the judge happens to consider relevant and credible in issuing the order. So there's a whole lot of subjectivity in the bill, and I'm troubled by that. I'm troubled by that because I know the record of the court system. The court system, studies show the court system does discriminate. A black person or a white person with similar background are often going to be treated differently in the courts, and drug use is considered differently when it's a person of color than when it's a white person. If you can afford a lawyer when you go to court, then you're treated differently than a person without. And under this bill, there's no right to a lawyer. If you can afford a lawyer, and if your lawyer if the lawyer you want is able to make it at the time the hearing is scheduled, you can use a lawyer. But a lot of people are going to be in there without a lawyer, and it's because the bill is so subjective in the grounds for this order, and there's no requirement that there should be any evidence that the person has made threatening remarks or threatening actions, the judge's subjectivity is given free rein, and I think we know enough about the flaws in the court system to know you don't want to do that when the consequences can be pretty serious. And in fact, the consequences are serious. I want to talk particularly about the temporary, what this calls the temporary extreme risk protective order, because the way that works is the police show up at a residence, and none of the residents know in advance that the police are going to be coming. There's no notice to the residents. The person who is the subject of the order doesn't even know that this was even being considered, and nobody else who lives there knows to expect the police. But the police come in, and they've been ordered by the judge to take away the guns. So the police are not going to be gentle in doing this, because they've been told by a judge, no less, that this person is an extreme risk. Never mind the fact that the evidence might not show anything about the person being a risk to others. Maybe it's just somebody thinks there's some risk of the person committing suicide. But the police come in thinking that this person is an extreme risk and wanting to carry out the judge's order by making sure they grab all the guns. And when you have that kind of situation, a lot of police are going to get agitated and aggressive, because police want to make it through the day. If they're told somebody's an extreme risk, they are going to in many cases, act aggressively to protect themselves. That's why swatting is a big deal. When some anonymous caller calls a SWAT team with a false report on somebody, Often people get killed or injured because the police are told to expect a great deal of danger. That's what this bill's language does, because it says somebody is dubbed an extreme risk, even if they're no risk to anybody else, and the police know to expect danger. They know to expect guns there, and if they see anything that's unexpected or not to their liking, there's what I would think is an unacceptably high risk that innocent people are going to get hurt or killed, maybe not even the person who was the respondent for the order. So that's a very dangerous procedure. Unfortunately, anybody who likes can swear out an affidavit and just say this person is an imminent threat, and then there's next party hearing. The respondent isn't even notified, doesn't know what's going on, doesn't have a right to respond, and if the judge, for whatever reason, is convinced that this person is a dangerous character, then you get this unannounced police raid, and that can cause a lot of problems. I think that's bad when there's so much invitation to the judge to be subjective, because for whatever reason you strike, from the reports given to the judge, you strike the judge as a dangerous character, even if there's not much objective evidence that you've talked of violence, then they may well decide they've got to issue this protective order. And this is the only time in our law where you have an ex parte hearing. That's the only time, as far as I know, when you have an ex parte hearing where a person isn't represented, which then issues in a police raid. I mean, in theory, when the police show up, you could meet them, say, sure, I'll give you my guns, but I think, and things might in theory go calmly, but I think they would still want to ransack the place at the very least and turn it upside down. And if you don't have the presence of mind to respond that way, things could go south pretty rapidly. I think at the very least this bill should be rewritten so that it requires some objective showing that the person has acted violently or has spoken in no uncertain terms about violent acts. And I don't mean just political rhetoric that a court might easily mistake for a threat of violence if the court isn't warned differently in statute. Another problem I really want to highlight with this bill, and other people have touched on this, is the way it deals with mental illness. I get that we're concerned about suicide. I get that people want to prevent somebody from committing suicide. But the way this bill treats mental illness is the judge has to look at the respondent's mental health history, and mental health history is considered a red flag, not just for harming yourself, but for harming others. So mental health history can be used as support for the theory that a person is about to harm somebody else. And just that kind of blanket use of a person's mental health history as signaling they might be a danger to others fits into the worst stereotypes about mental illness, which some of the other people have warned you about. They point out that only 1% of the people who have been violent have actually been mentally ill. And unfortunately, that's just part of this very subjective process that the judge is being placed into. And when you have a subjective process, one thing we know is stereotypes come into play. But another problem with the way this bill treats mental illness is that even if a person is genuinely at risk for suicide, the bill's way of dealing with that is is to send the police and perhaps on an unannounced raid and try to grab the guns away. I don't think you want to mix aggressive policing with mental illness in the case, particularly in cases where there's no reason to think somebody's a danger to somebody else. In this bill, the police aren't even warned that the judge didn't think the person was a danger to anybody else. It's just that this bill says that if you're considered a risk for suicide, they're going to treat you exactly the same as somebody who's considered a possible pre-criminal. So it's conflating mental illness with pre-crime. And when the bill sets up police officers to feel like they're in danger of their life, that's not going to be a recipe for the most sensitive way of treating people with mental illness, and might cause police to treat someone with mental illness in a way that exacerbates the problem. I know that we want to prevent suicide, but the way to prevent suicide is not necessarily by just focusing on grabbing guns away. Because say it works, say the police raid works, they do grab the guns away. Nobody's injured when the guns are taken, but still, an aggressive and traumatic police raid is not going to have the best effect on somebody if they actually are at risk for suicide. It might actually just lead to a situation where they find some way to kill themselves later on by some other means. And there's nothing in this bill that actually suggests adequate an enlightened approach to mental illness. The closest thing in this bill to an enlightened approach to mental illness is when they say that the court officers are supposed to come up with a list of mental health resources, and then they may display this list of mental health resources next to the brochures where you apply for a court order to take away someone's guns. That's not going to help at all. Basically, the bill focuses on using force against people who are deemed suicidal and not on getting them any help. And the way it does that is likely to make things very much worse. I also am concerned about the racial aspects of this. There are many neighborhoods where people of color live where it's more or less common for people to own guns. They feel they need that for protection. But because the bill gives free reins to the judge's subjectivity, what's likely to happen is people of color are going to be disproportionately targeted by this audience. By this bill, people with mental illness are going to be disproportionately targeted. People with unpopular opinions are going to be disproportionately targeted. If you're a person who has a lawyer and your background is something the judge finds appealing, you're not going to be as likely to be targeted by this bill. Now, I'm all for a society where we don't have guns. I think that would be great, but I just don't see this bill as a step in that direction. Realistically, what this bill would do is make this more of a society where a lot of privileged people have guns and aren't questioned that often about it, and a lot of people who, for whatever reason, don't have privilege are going to have their guns taken away in aggressive ways that may lead to more problems. And that's not something I can bet behind. I don't think it's going to make society better at all. I'll also mention that the
Senator Matz.
Randall, I'm listening to you. I'm trying to follow the piece. I share your concern about certainly about the racial profiling and the aspects of race, especially in this current culture. But a lot of the people that I know and at church and whatnot, they don't own guns. So I don't want you to think that every black person has a gun. And maybe the couple of people that I do know, a couple in particular at church, they're military people. So they have based on their military experience, they have the permits and everything else. But I just wanted to. So I am concerned about the profiling, but I don't want people going around here thinking that every black family has a gun. So just, I just wanted to make you aware of that. And then the other piece, as you was talking about the let me look at my notes here. The judges, I was trying to figure out with the benchmarks versus the judicial discretion. Do I have that right? Because some things have benchmarks, if I'm not mistaken. They have to follow certain
On some things, particularly federal, there are certain. Right.
Okay, yeah, so as you was talking about that, I was thinking about benchmarks, but, and whether I want the judges to have the discretion, and then, as opposed to, because you know what we went through with the mandatory sentencing. So then when the market crashed in 2008 and they found out that the economy, it was hurting all the state budgets, then they got away from the mandatory sentencing, and then they started giving the judges discretion again. So I share some of the concerns, but I was trying to follow you on those couple of points.
Thank you, Senator. I'll just say by no means I hope I wasn't engaging in any racial profiling or stereotyping myself. I did not mean to suggest that that overall black people own guns more than white people do. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see it was the other way around. But what I was thinking of in particular is there are some situations where, say, young men feel they have to own guns for protection. And I don't know whether that's any more true in black communities than white communities.
Well, thank you for clearing it up on me. Thank you. I feel better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, but it is something that's acknowledged to be true. I wasn't trying to make any overall comparison there. So yes.
Thank you.
And I just want to say about the benchmark issue that you raised. My concern is that that when this bill is explicit about the criteria the judge should consider, and it says the judge can consider whatever standards they want, but it says some specific criteria the judges should look at. Some of those criteria, I think, are going to lead to discrimination, like when it just says, look at the respondent's mental health history, or when it says you've got to look at alcohol or drug use, or you have to look at whether this person has ever been arrested, regardless of whether they've been convicted. I think in some cases, not all judges, but in some cases, that's going to lead the judges' stereotypes to come into play, and I'm a little worried about that. So let me just say, one other topic I wanted to mention was the possibility of false accusations, which we've heard about before. Now, in theory, the bill does provide a way for some kind of accountability for false accusations if somebody falsely files a petition like this. The problem is it doesn't work in practice, because what the bill says is that somebody who files a false petition, somebody who files a petition for the court order can be criminally prosecuted if you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that their statement was knowingly false. Now, that's a much tougher standard of proof. You got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt when somebody makes a false accusation. You don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt when when the judge orders one of these police raids to take away a person's guns. But not only that, in order to, if somebody makes a false accusation, you can't hold them accountable unless you can show that they knew it was false. So a former boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever, if they make a false accusation, and then all they have to do is say, well, I really believe this person was a danger. As long as they can claim they were sincere in believing what they said, they can't be prosecuted for it because you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they knew it was false. So in practice, you're not going to be able to prosecute the ex-spouse who makes a false report. You're not going to be able, except in exceptional cases, you're not going to be able to prosecute any of these people who may have an axe to grind because they can always say, well, I thought it was true. The bill also says that police and the attorney general can directly file these requests for an order. Well, nobody's going to prosecute the attorney general for a false report. I mean, come on. If the attorney general wants to harass somebody and claims that they are dangerous, nobody's going to go after the attorney general. I would rather not give that privilege to to a politician because this bill has so much potential for abuse against people who this has so much potential for abuse when the petitioner has an axe to grind. I don't think somebody in a powerful position who has political allegiances should have the discretion to decide who to file this bill against, who to file this order against. If things go wrong, if the Attorney General files a request that's not justified, or if police file a request basically to harass people, nobody is going to prosecute the police for that, just like nobody is going to prosecute the Attorney General. So this bill puts in a lot of power to almost send a swatting call against people without any practical accountability, and I consider that very dangerous.
Mr. Rose, could I just ask you to kind of move it along? We have a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Rose? Thank you very much. Sir, good evening and welcome. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, so much for your patience. And everybody is behaving extremely well and getting along very well, and we appreciate that more than you know. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I will try to keep this brief. My name is Jose Correa. I'm a Rhode Islander resident, American citizen, taxpayer, avid voter, and self-professed good guy with a gun. I think there's a lot of fear here, and fear is a powerful motivator. As a father of two young boys, 1'7" and 1'6", I think I understand fear a little bit. I fear for them and their safety all the time. I think many people will gladly trade their liberties for a sense of security. I don't think I'm one of those people at all. Some people aren't sure what an assault weapon is. I think I have an idea as to what an assault weapon actually is. It's anything you decide to use to assault someone with. That's an extremely long list. And shall we ban all of them? Whatever weapon you ban will be replaced by another weapon. The weapon is not the problem. The people who use them feloniously are the problem. I own a rifle, and I've never assaulted anyone, and I have no plans of doing so. Many of my friends own AR-15s, and they've never assaulted anyone with them either. We have them for hunting, for home protection. I respect our brave police, but they don't station themselves outside my house or any of my friends' house. So I'm the first person and the best line of defense for my family and for myself. No disrespect to the police, that will eventually get there. So I don't think I should be stripped of my constitutional rights to alleviate anyone's fears. And I assure you, no criminal will care about any ban you impose. I believe it was Sammy Gravano who said he loved the idea of gun control. Knowing a non-criminal has a lesser level of armament emboldens a felon. I don't oppose common sense laws based on clear, objective evidence, but I do oppose reactionary laws based on fear. I want police details in school, all schools, all the time. We can employ veterans to protect our children as well, and I don't see why we don't, in fact. I don't think a ban on larger capacity magazines will have any effect on criminals. Neither will a ban on rifles. A motivated criminal can build his own rifle. Are you going to ban YouTube and the instructions it provides to criminals? While you are trying to enact laws, let's spend more money on mental health, more money on youth employment, more community outreach, more community policing. If we embrace our youth with our tax dollars, we may not be having this conversation in a generation or two, and I really hope we don't have these conversations for my children's sake. Lastly, and I said I would make this brief, so I'll keep it brief, concerning the red flag issue, while I do applaud the concern for the safety of our citizens, I'm kind of big on due process. Do we really want our citizens to prove their innocence rather than the judicial process to prove the guilt? I'm pretty sure everyone is innocent until proven guilty. At least that's the way, our laws are built. Also, once the police have your guns, nothing against the police, but they don't like to give them back. There's a man named Dan Bilzerian, and some of you might know who he is. Very famous, rich guy, and he lives in Los Angeles. His net worth is $150 million. He has dozens, if not hundreds, of firearms. He was out of town. I believe this happened in 2015, September, I think. And the alarm to his mansion went off. The LAPD went to investigate. There had been a break-in, but nothing was missing as far as they could tell. They found no one there, but they did confiscate 1 rifle and 8 pistols that belonged to Mr. Dan Bilzerian. For 2 months, the police inexplicably continued to keep the 9 firearms under lock and key without a warrant. It took a man worth $150 million 2 months to get back his property. Most of us have no means of fighting that kind of system. I think red flag, as written, can be used to confiscate legal weapons from completely sane citizens. I know that's not what it's meant to do, but it can do it the way it's written now. My final comment is this. I don't think we should ever, ever let our fears write our policies for us. So I oppose all these bills as currently written based on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
Hello, thanks for letting it hear us. My name is Mike. I'm a Providence resident. Been here for about 2 years now. Moved down here for work. I like Rhode Island. It's great. And I've been to a couple of these hearings, mostly in the House, the past couple of years. So I just have a few things I'd like to say about each of the bills. As far as the first, to start out, I'd like to say I'm in support of S-2134, which is the Attorney General reports to the General Assembly or the Senate on gun crimes. And it goes with the same saying of getting better statistics will help you, create better laws and not create bad laws either. You'll come to realize that, these assault weapons are used in a fraction of a percent, if that, of crimes, especially in Rhode Island. So they can't, make up things anymore or use federal examples in this state. Also in support of S2148, which is the reciprocity bill. Almost all of the states have reciprocity with other states. It's completely a liberty that has been extended by almost every other state to their citizens, and I don't understand why we couldn't have it fixed, and work like other states. I'd like to say that I am against 2455, which is limiting only the Attorney General to issue concealed carry permits. I don't know of any other state that does it like that, so I'm not sure why we would do it like that. I can't imagine how it would streamline the process, considering how small the Attorney General, office is. I'd like to say I'm against S2456, which is the FBI fingerprinting. I'd like to say, and in the last two, before comment, I guess would be, I'm against S2274. Which just seems like additional restrictions on rifle shotgun transport. The point was made earlier that open carry is legal, so I can't imagine why someone could get stopped open carrying a shotgun and have drugs on them, and the police couldn't do anything about it. That's a drug problem, criminal issue. Then I don't understand what the problem is there. S2276, possession of long guns by a minor. I'm against that as well. Okay, so the last three I'd just like to make a comment on are 2289, which would be peace officers or police officers are the only ones allowed to carry on school grounds. So we know that gun-free zones don't work. I mean, that's obvious. They don't work. A sign's not going to stop someone from hurting a child. And honestly, the burden of proof should be on the people trying to pass this, because it's been okay previously for concealed carriers to carry on school property, and there's been no problem. And I guess the last point I would make about this is that people keep talking about their safe little towns, but we don't carry guns because our towns are safe. We carry guns because they're not safe. They're not safe. No town is safe. We know this. That's why we carry pistols. And I don't see why we can't, as parents, I'm not a parent personally, but I will be, and I don't understand why I couldn't carry a pistol on the property where I'm dropping off my child. It seems like, they're my duty to protect until I get to public school property, and then a sign that says no guns will protect them from here on out. Well, that doesn't seem to work. As far as the extreme risk red flag bill, I've seen some strange wording in there that seems to to get rid of due process, especially with the temporary order. So apparently, if the police officer, let's say, thinks there's an even greater risk than the norm, I guess, to wait 20 days for the court to issue, then they can do the temporary one, and the person who they're trying to save from himself or herself does not get told about it. So how is that due process? I mean, you can't just all of a sudden make someone a criminal for no reason. Okay. Health records, those are private. We have HIPAA. That's always been a thing. I don't understand why we can just swipe that off the table. Now, something else that's a little peculiar about the bill is that a petitioner is defined as a LEO, law enforcement officer, or a family member, or a household member. So does that mean a roommate can just order this extreme risk thing on you? I mean, that's ridiculous. So what if your roommate doesn't get along with you and he just wants to take your guns? I mean, it seems strange. So the last part, I guess, would be the family member or the LEO may request a renewal. So if you have had your rights stripped and it didn't go ugly and it was fine, now the police have your guns, it says in the bill that you have to wait a year before you can appeal, or you can appeal, and within a year they have to either give you your guns back or not. But a family member or a LEO can just request renewal. So a cop that didn't like you could just say, okay, well, I'm just going to keep renewing this over and over again, and you'll never get your guns back. There's no limits to how many times they can renew. It seems to be no burden of proof on the officer or family member to renew. It's just, oh, well, it's already in state, so let's just renew it. And as far as the LEO or the Attorney General as a petitioner, again, yeah, there's very little liability for them to strip you of your rights because you have no recourse, basically. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this, it seems to be that there's a gap in the protection that this is trying to offer. So would this have stopped the Parkland shooter? Perhaps. I'll concede that. But everyone tonight has been talking about local cases of maybe domestic assault or domestic violence or something like that. And to me, so if a 19-year-old girl is, had a bad breakup with her boyfriend or something, and he threatened to hurt her on Monday, and she files the order on Monday, well, the court doesn't have to order until 7 days after. So that means that the maximum it could go is the next Monday. However, if she were to say, okay, well, the court's going to take 7 days, and he threatened to kill me Monday, saying he's going to come Tuesday, I think I'll go buy a firearm to protect myself. Well, she can't do that either because we have a 7-day waiting period. So she can't get the firearm in 7 days, and she can't get the court order in 7 days. So she's got 7 days where someone might hurt her. It seems strange that would be the solution to this problem. As far as the last thing I'll talk about, the assault weapon ban, we've talked about it tonight. Assault weapons is a made-up term. It doesn't mean anything. The action of a firearm is usually what defines it. It can be semi-auto, which means one fire for a pull the trigger. It can be fully auto, which means you pull the trigger and it keeps cycling till it's out of ammunition. Or it can be a burst, which is sort of in between. Okay, semi-auto rifles are used in only a fraction of the percent of crimes nationally, mostly because they're not easy to conceal. I mean, you can't conceal an AR-15. It's just not easy. Okay, so that's why most of the criminals use pistols. I hunt with an AR-15. I know people like to question that. I'm not sure why. It's light, it's accurate, it's incredibly reliable, and the most important thing is quick follow-up shots. It's really hard to hit a squirrel. They're very fast. I have to shoot several times to hit them, or coyotes as well. As far as the grandfathering clause in the assault weapons ban, I haven't heard anyone else mention this, and I'm not a lawyer, so I could be completely wrong here. But as far as I know, registration of firearms is a specific law that's specifically illegal in Rhode Island. So how are they going to create a registry of grandfathered rifles when a registry is illegal to create? I'm not sure how that's going to happen. So perhaps we don't get our grandfathering after all. I don't know. And the last thing I'll mention is, the AR-15s they're a tool, okay, and they're really not that powerful. I mean, to a soft target, it'll do damage, but the funny part is there's a rifle that I just thought of off the top of my head that is not in the assault weapon ban language, okay? An AR-15, the round that it shoots has about 1,291 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. That's a lot. But the rifle that operates the same way, has the same action as an AR-15, was used in World War II as an infantry rifle, shoots a round that has 2,820 foot-pounds of energy. That's twice as powerful as an AR-15, and it operates the same exact way, and it's not in the assault weapons ban. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but it's just ridiculous that, we're calling an AR-15 of weapons of war, because it's just ridiculous. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses we're going to call are Kelly Smith, Carson Cole, and Laura Levinson.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the democratic process. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm a resident of Lincoln. I've lived in Rhode Island for just about 20 years now. I'm here tonight as a private citizen and a parent, but I am also a Unitarian Universalist and a public health researcher, and my faith and my chosen profession compel me to speak out about gun violence. I am very saddened that it has taken yet another mass shooting in a school to finally see some national momentum on sensible gun laws. And as you've heard already, of course, it's the mass shootings that get so much attention, but public health scholars know that mass shootings represent but a small fraction of the annual gun deaths in this country. And a high school friend of mine was actually killed by a disgruntled employee. It was a murder-suicide. He and his wife, by gun, he and his wife were both killed by this employee in Colorado in 2010. This was a guy who had been a real screw-up in high school, and he had gotten his act together and had his own business, and things were going really well for him until this disgruntled employee decided that he wanted to kill Sean and his wife. And he did that and then turned the gun on himself, left behind Sean and his wife's daughter. Just last week in Providence, there was a domestic incident, a murder-suicide that left 2 young children orphaned. I couldn't agree more that we need to pay more attention and spend far more money on mental health. I think easy access to guns means more impulsive homicides and suicides, and as well as premeditated violence. And I think that too often mental health programs are defunded and discounted by the same people who say we should be paying more attention to mental health in the wake of gun violence. I think we also need to pay attention to the crisis, particularly crisis of masculinity, that leads so many young people, particularly young men, to be angry and violent and feel disenfranchised. I think that's heartbreaking, and I really appreciate what one of the previous speakers said about let's invest more money in youth employment. Let's spend more time investing in our young people. I think Rhode Island has a chance to be a leader here. I don't think for a second that these bills are the bills before the legislature are going to change everything around gun violence in this state, but I think we can signal that we're taking this seriously and that Rhode Island could be a leader. I don't think that responsible gun owners have anything to fear from reasonable gun control legislation. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Senators. My name is Carson Cole, and I am a lifelong resident of Rhode Island. I'm currently in 8th grade, which means I will be attending high school next year. I do not want to go to school every day and worry that someone is going to come in and shoot me, my classmates, my teachers, or my coaches. What happened in Parkland is not as far-fetched as we think it is. I'm excited for high school, and I don't want that feeling to be overshadowed by the fear that I might die when I walk in the doors. Recently, we've been doing active shooter drills at my school, and it scares me every time we have a drill. So I hope that tonight you know that you have the power to keep thousands of teenagers and kids like me safe by passing the gun control bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. My name is Nora Levinson. I am also in the 8th grade. I'm a classmate of Carson. And like she said, we've recently been having many school shooting drills. We have adopted a procedure called ALICE, which means that we practice barricading and evacuating. And we've had many difficult conversations with our teachers about this possibility and, you know, the recent events of the Parkland shooting. And it's terrifying as a student, and we go in every day, and, you know, this isn't our primary focus. It shouldn't be our primary focus. It should be our, you know, our education and just going into school and doing the best we can and speaking with our classmates. But this has kind of taken over our lives, and it could happen in any school now, which is terrifying reality. And our emotions are very confusing right now as a student, and we're depending on the adults who have the power to vote and make these changes that would protect us and our classmates and our teachers. And I just am very grateful for this opportunity to speak to you so that you have the perspective of students and what we're feeling right now. And we're very grateful for you for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming up here tonight. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses, we have our Representative Quattrochi, Louis Bisong, Sky Soderberg. Rep, we'll start with you. Good evening, and I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and committee members. I will be very brief, but I did want to go on the record. I am in favor of 2134 and 2148. I am opposed to all the rest of the infringing proposals. I really don't want to repeat anything that's been said because, you know, obviously it's a long night and a lot has been said, a lot of excellent testimony. So what I would like to add is that as well-intended, I'd like to address the red flag bill. And as well-intended as it is, I don't want to repeat any testimony, but I would like to offer some scenarios after listening to a former state prosecutor. And the first one is a battered wife who may skip off with her children and purchase a firearm to protect herself. And her abuser has the power and the ability to have her protection taken away by reporting her that the children are not safe or she's not mentally stable or something to that effect. So that's not out of the realm of possibility if you think about it. And like I said, again, this is coming from a former state prosecutor. The second scenario would be, say, for instance, a grandmother who ends up with her teenage grandson, or maybe a couple, or a teenage grandson with a drug problem, with a girlfriend, or all kinds of friends coming in and out of the house, and she's afraid for her life, and maybe has a firearm. There's nothing to stop those kids from reporting her as being something mentally wrong with the woman and having her firearm taken away and taking her safety away. Now, the other things I'd like to point out are that at the same time that we're talking about affecting law-abiding gun owners, Second Amendment supporters. At the very same time we're talking about this, very recently in Providence, there was a shooting at the Providence Place Mall, which I'm sure we are all aware of. And forgive me if someone has brought this up already, but the response from the mayor in Providence was that this person was just a knucklehead. He just got done shooting someone, and they released him to home confinement because he's a knucklehead. So we are taking away or asking to take away the rights of law-abiding gun owners, and this is going on. We're letting these people go. Another case was who he was referred to as a drug kingpin. He was released. He was found with drugs, fentanyl, which we're all trying, everybody's so concerned about it, and a handgun, weapons. He was released. So I just wanted to point that out, that it seems a very lopsided situation that we have here. I guess I'll just finish up really quick and just say, we have a lot of poison ivy in Situate, and you'll never kill the root of poison ivy by pulling off the leaves and thinking you're going to kill the plant. You're not going to kill the root. The root will always be there. So thank you very, very much for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, Senator Lombardi?
I just want to welcome my colleague, and you forgot to mention Weston Cranston, which is also part of your district.
Absolutely.
And mine. So you're not just
Yes,
from
sir.
Situate. Always a pleasure to see you, Rep.
Thank you. I don't think you have as much poison ivy, though.
Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
How you doing? My name is Louis Pisono. I've lived in Rhode Island my entire life. I'm a father to a soon-to-be 8-year-old beautiful baby boy who's my entire world. So I share a lot of the same sentiments that pretty much everybody who's a parent, and even some of the non-parents here, about the anxieties of sending your kid to school in this day and age where you have to worry about them getting shot up. I wasn't raised in a gun household. I was actually raised in a pretty anti-gun household. I became a gun owner basically for self-defense. As of late, I've gotten into competitive shooting. I fly across the country for different matches. And I can say without hesitation that we are probably one of the strictest states in the country when it comes to gun ownership. I guess the first one I want to talk about is the No Guns in Schools bill. As you know, I just said about my son, if I believe that this could keep him safer, I would support it wholeheartedly. I think part of the problem that we don't see with people who are concealed carry permit holders is that mostly everybody who doesn't want guns in schools hasn't been through the process of actually obtaining a concealed weapons permit. And I can tell you that for me, it was almost a year in my town to actually get it. And the level of vetting and background checks that they do, and contacting mental health facilities and whatnot, is pretty onerous. And it's actually above what the law allows. But I didn't have a problem with it because, I want to make sure that people who are handed permits are the qualified people, you know what I'm saying? With that said, I would welcome anybody who doesn't understand what we go through to actually go to their town, apply for a permit, see what the process is, get to meet some of us. The people who are causing these issues aren't permit holders. We're some of the most law-abiding citizens in the state, especially in Rhode Island, because it's been so hard to get a permit in this state, depending on which town you live, that it's something that we hold near and dear. As far as the bump stock ban, I've owned bump stocks. They're a gimmick. I get that they're put on the national stage. Realistically, a bump stock facilitates bump firing of a weapon, which essentially harnesses the recoil to facilitate the next shot. That has been around since the inception of semi-automatic weapons. The stock just happens to be what we grab onto because it's what made national headlines after Vegas, right? The biggest part that I have with the bill, problem I have with the bill is the same thing that everybody else has, is the rapid fire language. And I think that the first thing is that if you're going to define an increase in the rate of fire, or if you're going to dictate the increase in rate of fire, you first have to define what the standard rate of fire is. And what is the standard rate of fire for any of these guns? I don't see any of that language here. So it's almost like an arbitrary thing where you replace the spring, you replace this and that, and now all of a sudden you're a felon because you just increased the rate of fire that was never defined in the first place. Moving on to the assault weapons ban, I think somebody already made a great point about how, and I do get that the AR-15 is the preferred choice of weapon, but the number 3 mass shooting still sits at Virginia Tech. 32 people died. One of those guns flies so far under the radar, 10-round magazines, everything that everybody wants us to only have was what was used to commit those atrocities. And to the point about the 223 or 5.56 round that is shot from an AR-15, causing damage to body parts, I guess people don't really understand how ballistics work because we don't talk about buckshot or slugs or anything else that is okay in everybody else's eyes. My son means so much to me that a 9mm round through him or a 223 is irrelevant. I want to make sure that that person doesn't have any gun, not just a rifle. That's what's important to me. I want him to grow up in an environment, feel safe, and not have to worry about. I don't want to have these conversations with him. I'd rather have the birds and the bees convo before having this convo. And 1 second here while I read my notes. The 10-round capacity, I touched upon that a little bit with the assault weapons ban, but I believe it was Columbine. One of the guns the shooter had 10-round mags. He carried 15 or 16, I don't know the number exactly, but he carries 16 10-round magazines. So people are clearly going to find a way, to defeat these things. And then back to the assault weapons ban, California, Connecticut, all these states that we want to be like have instituted these, and they're either followed up by very little compliance, or they're followed up by gun manufacturers immediately coming up with a workaround solution. So it's, again, another Band-Aid to a societal problem that we've created in the past 20 years, or however long. Columbine happened in the middle of the assault weapons ban. In the 70s, you could have AR-15s mailed to your house. In the 80s, you could have machine guns. And then the Brady Bill came out in 91 or 92 for background checks, and then 94 was assault weapons ban, and then we've just gone downhill, and we failed to recognize what has changed in society that has led to this. I just feel like a lot of it is just plug-and-play Band-Aids, and to me, we're so fascinated with numbers that 2 weeks before Parkland, there was a school that was shot up and 2 people died, and it was like no headlines were made. 1 death is just as bad as 17 deaths. And I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening.
I want to thank the entire judicial committee here. We're going on 12 hours in this room together, so I'll try and make this as brief as I can. My name is Sky Soderberg. I have extensive experience with firearms recreationally and professionally, from my first exposure to them in the Cub Scouts all the way up now to my position as operations manager of an indoor gun range and an NRA certified pistol instructor. You skip a lot of this. There are bills that I'm clearly going to be against in this, and it's going to be the majority of them. I do strongly support Bill S-213, Bill 2139, 2144, and 2148, and I strongly oppose just about the rest of them. My biggest issue with most of these bills is the ambiguity in their wording. I feel like it allows for a vagueness that I'm sure you on the council have seen abused to many ends many times before. And I would want to ensure that the specifics were ironed out before any of them were passed into law. Let's see. I feel like what we need time for now, and a lot of things have been mentioned, I think the biggest thing that we need now is education. We need data, we need research, which is why, Senator Archambault, I'm so strongly in support of your bill requiring the Attorney General to report the findings of their statistics that they take in. And then, furthermore, Senator Lombardi, I commend you on your, what to use here, bare language of Mayor Lorza's emotionally charged narrative that he was pushing earlier. I don't think it's time for that kind of emotion. I think that'll just breed reactive legislation, and I don't think that will accomplish anything of value. At the range, we host a free, open class to the public, just about how to handle a firearm safely, or about how to unload a firearm safely, how to transport it, how to store it, things like that, just because it's a level of education not a lot of people are exposed to unless they're already part of the firearms community and it's something that they partake in of their own merit. Which is more to say, I've never seen a community who is more committed to increasing their proficiency just for their own, out of their own pocket and for their own personal gain, to be able to better protect themselves and their loved ones. As far as some of the other issues that have been brought up tonight, I believe this is a fantastic way to prevent accidents with firearms, is running that class. Kind of gets rid of the, not gets rid of, but it lessens the chance of that happening when people have education, they have the correct instruction. As far as suicide rates with firearms are concerned, I almost find it incredulous that anyone would find the availability of a firearm relevant to suicide rate. To think that suicide is a matter of how convenient it is to find the means is ridiculous to me. It's something that needs to be addressed on a much deeper level, and whether it's a firearm, whether it's rope or Advil, the means doesn't matter. It's that the drive to do it was there. And while I'm on the topic of convenience, if we move on to the assault weapon ban, and again, this goes right back into what I was saying. The means really doesn't matter here. And just as you said a moment ago, it doesn't matter if it's one kid or two or 17. It's an awful act that happened. And if just because he had a rock instead of a rifle and one child died, that doesn't make it a better situation. Yes, less people are affected, but it's still tragic. I don't think a blanket ban on assault weapons, whatever you choose that definition to mean, will really do anything to rectify that issue. All of this I've submitted in written testimony, so it'll be on record, but I just hope that you guys see the outpouring of yellow shirts tonight and the level of activity this community is willing to take to make sure that the legislature going into place is something effective and something that defends their rights as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Jason Dubois, Dan Badandi, and Stephen Hebert. Sir, we'll start with you on our right, your left. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll try to be right to the point and brief. Many people have testified before me, have brought points that I already believe the same way, so I will not reiterate them. One aspect that I would like to bring up, though, pertains to the mental health issue. Issues with the bill and due process aside, I think that we can all agree that someone who is, I'll use a medically, or not an official medical term, but I've heard it tonight, someone who is unhinged, we certainly would not want them to have access to firearms. But I would go further to say that if there's someone who we can't trust in society with firearms, I wouldn't trust them with knives or an automobile or potentially gasoline or anything like that. So my point being in that if there is someone who is of such extreme risk, perhaps we should look at mandating that they get either some mental help that they need, and if they are truly unhinged, I don't want them walking the streets. I'd like to see them confined in some way to address their mental situation. Moving on to my other topic tonight that I'd like to address just briefly is the assault weapons ban bill. And we get to that term, the so-called term assault weapon. Frankly, I think it's a pejorative term that is promulgated by people who want to reinforce a negative connotation about it. A gun by itself isn't going to assault anything or anyone. And the definition of what classifies or people are trying to classify as an assault weapon now is one that is evolving over time. As other states have, in some cases, banned so-called assault weapons, that the language gets even more broad as we go along. And what we're looking at is a bill that would really ban what are now and even increasingly more so common and mainstream firearms. The AR-15, which some people have a very negative view on, if you get right down to it, is actually a very enjoyable firearm to shoot and is applicable to many legal uses. Some of the attributes of it are low recoil to make it comfortable for maybe to introduce a new shooter to. The adjustable buttstock or telescoping buttstock, which is something mentioned as one of the qualifying features in the bill, is also a matter of convenience. I am a certified instructor and also range officer for my gun club. When we do family days, I found that a modern sporting rifle or AR-15 type rifle actually can be a convenient choice because you're able to adjust the buttstock to fit people of many different statures. And also say that people talk about no one needs an AR-15 for hunting. Well, there are many different types of guns, and personally I've hunted with everything from a flintlock Kentucky rifle to an AR-15. And that AR-15 actually is increasingly more popular as a sporting and hunting rifle that many people use either for competitive shooting or for hunting. And those same attributes that I just mentioned in terms of being comfortable in terms of low recoil and being with adjustable buttstock, they really can make an ideal gun to introduce someone to shooting. And if you try it, you'll find that, or I think there's a high likelihood that you may enjoy the experience. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And but what I want to say is going to be very extremely serious, and I need the attention of everybody here because I grew up here in Rhode Island. My family dates back all the way to the Revolutionary War. I had family who fought with George Washington in the Revolution, and I know American history very well, extremely well. Grew up with everybody in my house had guns, military and everything. And as a young age, I knew how to field strip a weapon and knew how to respect the weapon. But that being said, what disgusts me the most, and please do not take any this personal, but what disgusts me the most is Benjamin Franklin said that those who would give up their essential liberties to obtain any kind of security will get or deserve neither. Now we have Americans, people who dare to call themselves Americans, to say, I'm willing to give up my Second Amendment to keep us safe. Who's going to keep us safe from the government? I want you senators there, please, answer me this question. Who's going to keep, if I own an AR-15, and so does about 2,000 people that came here tonight. Who's going to, if we have to turn in our weapons, right, who's going to protect us from the government? if one day they to become rogue? Could you answer that, please? If we were to turn in our weapons, who's going to protect us from our own government? That's what the number one reason, and I could debate anybody right now, okay, the number one reason the Second Amendment was established, not for duck hunting, okay? It was to protect we the people from our own government if one day they were able to become rogue. Because the Founding Fathers seen the monarchy systems will happen all over Europe and everything else, and they warned us. So these days, what's happening here now is we have some politicians who hijacked the term politician. They sit there, when you got into office, like I ran for office myself, but when you got into office, okay, you served in the military, anything, you sit there with your hand up. You're swearing an oath to the Constitution for the United States of America. And you have politicians who've done this, but dare to put garbage like this to make possession of use of a semi-automatic weapon and rapid fire up to 10 years in prison. Are you kidding me? For law-abiding citizens, you're going to tell me my 30-round magazine, my AR-15 is going to land me in jail if this damn bill passes. I'm a law-abiding citizen, okay? And I just want to make this, I want to put this state on notice, okay? The state has no jurisdiction nor authority to make such laws because the Constitution clearly says, okay, any law that's repugnant to the Constitution is null and void. That means I don't care if this bill passes, you can pass it all you want, I am not going to comply. And over my dead body from my cold dead hands does anybody get my firearms. My founding fathers, my ancestors fought for the civil liberties that you all have. The only thing that keeps us all free here, your freedom of speech, freedom of this and all that, is the people's right to keep and bear arms. You remember that, 1900s, for the whole century, hundreds of millions of people died because of gun control. Every one of those kids that died in those schools, their blood is on the hands of the gun control. Because if those teachers, those people had the right to defend themselves, they'd all be alive today. And everybody knows that. We know it's nothing to do with control, okay, over guns. It's control over the population. We have people since the Founding Fathers to modern days through history warning us of this communist agenda to mislead the children in schools, manipulating these poor children, exploiting them to come up here to testify. Oh, take the guns, please. And these poor kids don't know history. They don't know history. They don't know the importance of we the people to keep and bear arms. We are the power, okay? We elect you to represent us, the people. No, you talk about numbers, okay? I got it right here on video. I had made several videos. I reached more people than WPRI Channel 12 ever could dream of. And I got it on numbers here. When I come to the State House last week when they had the rally for the gun control, maybe about 200 people. I come here today, right on the third floor here, double that, just on the third floor alone, than what they had. We had, there was a report about 3,000 people came here. 99% of that was gun supporters, gun rights supporters. And it's not even counting the people. And the other side, they had to bus people in from other states. We didn't do that. They were all Rhode Islanders. And plain and simple, we're sick of the garbage. Plain and simple, we want to put you on notice. We elected you to abide by the law. That's the Constitution, not your corporate people, not your lobbyists and all that. The Constitution of the United States, and get it through your heads that the Second Amendment, okay, in our Rhode Island State Constitution says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And there's nobody's jurisdiction or power to override that. I don't care what manipulation or who went to Harvard Law School, whatever. The Constitution is plain as day. We don't need interpretations. Okay, the Founding Fathers made that quite clear, and I challenge anybody to read the Founding Fathers' writings. Very important how this is going on, because if we turn in our firearms today, because what's going to happen, if that bill passes, I'm telling you right out, you're going to start a revolution. Plain and simple, Rhode Island was the first state that declared its independence against Britain because they were sick and tired of the garbage. The British wanted our guns. The British wanted us to force a state religion on our throats, taxation without representation. The same stuff, the same garbage, the globalist garbage that's going on here right in the state of Rhode Island. And we're sick of it, and we're going to stand up against it. And what I'm telling you right now, you're going to turn thousands of Rhode Islanders into criminals overnight. And I know I'm going to get the attention of every one of you, okay? God bless every one of you who support the Constitution. I'm behind you 100%. But for you, those who don't, and I'm telling you right now, if this bill passes, I will run for office, and I will see to the end of my days that everybody who pushed these strict, draconian gun laws, that will be trial for treason. This is pure treason, and I'm telling you right now, if the Founding Fathers came alive today, what's going on right now, there will be a revolution tomorrow. plain and simple. And people need to understand that. You need to stop saying, oh, we got to be like Connecticut. We got to be like Massachusetts. We got to be like Australia. Oh, we got to be like this one. No, we got to be like Rhode Island. We have a great law enforcement unit called the Rhode Island State Police. They are on top of things. That's why we don't have mass shootings. And I'm not saying it can't happen here, but they are on top of things. We've got an awesome law enforcement agency. We got awesome Rhode Islanders who respect the law, like myself, thousands of gun owners. How many gun clubs here in Rhode Island? How many gun shops here in Rhode Island? Democrats, Republicans, of all parties love the Second Amendment here in Rhode Island. That's why we've been holding gun control back for a while. And in regards to the lying polls, okay, of the Pro-Joe, all polls show, even David Cicilline's polls, that at least 70% of Rhode Islanders do not think more gun control is going to work. I could go on all day with stats, but it's not about stats here. It's about the Constitution. For anybody right now to say, I'm going to give up my civil liberties that my ancestors fought for, your ancestors fought for, oh, let's let the government protect us and hope and pray that somebody doesn't come in our school. No, I don't think so. We're not going to allow it. We, the people, are not going to allow it, and we're not going to stand for it. And I need to put the entire state on notice about it. And I don't care what kind of, I don't care if it's the federal government, the state authorities, whatever. Nobody at all is taking our firearms. 1776 will begin again if anybody dares to try to touch our firearms. And this is a serious matter, and you people need to understand this, okay? And I'm sick of people like Josh Miller and all that sitting there laughing because we got a Second Amendment, laughing, oh, look at those gun supporters, okay, because you never need to take us serious. We're out there, every time there's gun rallies, we quadruple the opposition, quadruple that. And it's a pure sick and disgusting. I gotta sit here and do this, okay? I've been here since probably like 12 o'clock today, and I'm fed up, okay? And I teach my son American history as well. And what's gonna happen when he grows up to be my age? Oh, we used to have a Second Amendment, but the cowards called Americans gave that right up, okay? And our founding fathers warned us against this, okay? So I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrats, I'm an independent, okay? I support you. No, I don't care what party you are. You support the Constitution, I'm behind you 100%. But this needs to be understood, and it's not about political parties, okay? The NRA, that's the limit of the argument. Let's blame the NRA. They teach nothing but gun safety. And it's not even, there's millions, hundreds of millions of Americans that do own firearms that are not part of the NRA. You know, we are not criminals, okay? All these gun control laws do is say, oh, let's ban the weapons because, oh, yeah, criminals are going to follow that, right? I mean, are you serious? Eric Holder, the Attorney General, a former Attorney General, he stated, we got to brainwash the American people, and you can find that comment right on your phone. Brainwash the American people to think guns are bad. They are openly declaring war on the American people. This is a globalist agenda. The United Nations meets every year. Their number one goal is disarm the American people. That's a communist manifesto agenda. The things our founding fathers will warn us about. People like JFK, all our great presidents we had warned us about this stuff. So you people really need to understand and listen to this because, frankly, we could be here all night. I'm a talk show host. I could talk for hours. I could hold this place up for days if I have to.
You're not going to do that tonight, Dwight.
No. But, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody out there, any politicians, but please, you know what? Our Constitution is the most sacred thing. And I understand nobody, I cried too when those kids died. We all did. And I'm sure both sides here could agree with that. It's not the guns, okay? It's the people. It's when you took the Second Amendment away, that's when all hell broke loose. Nobody could defend themselves. And no, nobody wants to go shooting up the place like the Wild West. I own a gun since I was 16 years old. And not once did I even think of turning that gun on somebody. And I don't care if it's my opposition, if somebody hates me. If I see their life in danger, I'm going to stand there and protect them and risk my life to protect them as well. You know what I mean? That's the mentality of all those people who own weapons and love the Second Amendment. We love everybody, even my opposition right here. You know, I would protect them with my life if I had to, and their children. You know what I mean? We need to come together as Americans, not Republicans and Democrats, as Americans, under the Constitution, on the side, there's the line right there, on the side of General George Washington, President George Washington, Thomas Paine and Paul Revere and all them. We need to stay on that side. Never mind this garbage here. We need to give up our civil liberties because that's a pure coward right there. And I'm about done, but I just encourage you to stand for the Constitution and the American people because we will resist any laws, I'm telling you right now. And those of you who do vote for these bills, one way or another, make no mistake about it, we the people, that's what who has the power, we the people make sure those people will be held accountable before treason. And that needs to be understood and understand, because people thought we were a joke back in 1775. Thought we were a big joke, or a little percent, 2-3% of people, they're nothing. We beat the world's strongest army, the most armed army, and today we have, in this country, well over 60-70% of America that is ticked off and awake right now. So we are that close, and we know nobody wants that. We want to do this civilly, like we're doing here, all of us meeting together, talking civilly, but we need to understand the Constitution comes first, and when you start tampering the Second Amendment, like you've been doing, that's why all hell is breaking loose. And when you learn to lead, like, you have a right to bear arms, you have a right to bear arms, all of you do. Who the heck is the state to say you can't? That's not what the Constitution says. The state does what we tell you to do. Plain and simple. We elect you. We are the people. We're the bosses. You do what the majority does. And clearly, and I got it on video and everything, clearly, we are the majority here. We do not, we want to be left alone. We're law-abiding citizens. And like hell and over dead bodies, we will ever give up our firearms.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, buddy. Stephen Hebert. First of all, thank you guys for being here. God bless everybody here. Ditto to what this guy just said. You know, woo, man. I don't know about you, but my mind could go. I could get very easily distracted from anything, pretty much.
Have it the foggiest idea.
You know, but it was Mr. Mattis, if I'm pronouncing his name right. You know, when it comes to all these different bills, and especially when it comes to if I'm red flag bill, I have a lot of things. I wasn't planning on doing this tonight. You know, when it comes, I'm a spiritual guy. You know, one of the things I've learned in my life is from what William James would say in his book of Varieties of Religious Experiences, that no one can accurately translate what goes on in the mind of someone else. And when it comes, ditto. You know, when it comes to hardening schools, yeah, I'm in favor of that. But you know, what's going to stop someone from, like, the DC shooter, you know, for shooting out of his trunk, and pretty much anything that we've heard tonight. But you know, to keep it on my personal level, for whatever you guys do, again, I'm ditto with this guy. You know, but when it comes to the mental health, I'm a LTC carrier, and I had to get a letter from my doctor, and in this letter, he basically said, you could hold true whatever I have to say as for truth. A couple of years ago, in that same doctor's hospital, I fell in a pre-op, received a concussion. A month later, I'm telling this doctor what's going on. He referred me to 2 neurologists. And in his report, he put down psych issues versus legal issues. This is a doctor that I've been going to for 10 years. There's never been a problem. He even gave me a letter to get my LTC. And in this letter, he puts in a reference to these 2 neurologists saying that psych issues versus legal issues. That's in my record today. So with that being said, again, ditto to what this gentleman just mentioned. It's good to be here tonight. It's nice to be able to have a voice. It's nice to be able to have a choice on what type of firearm I would like to use. And I don't want to take that right away for someone that hasn't been born yet. You know, there's so much I could say, and I know when I go home tonight, there's going to be a lot more I could have said. But, man, all I can say is ditto to what this guy said. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Greg Greenenfelder, Will Worthy, Andre Mendez. Thank you. George Folks, Richard Cole, How about Justin Pattinson Schmidt? Sir, we'll start with you. Good evening and welcome. We're getting close to good morning, but I'm going to keep with good evening to make myself feel better.
So, good evening. My name's Greg Gruenfelder. I'm a resident of Rhode Island, active voter.
Can you just make sure the button is up?
It is. Let me move it much closer. So, my name's Greg Gruenfelder. I'm a Rhode Island resident and a voter. I was shooting probably before I can really remember. As as a child, my father would take me target shooting, and I've pretty much shot my whole life. I received my first rifle when I was 18. I've been a member of a gun club for years. I have a town-issued concealed carry permit from Woonsocket, which I will tell you was extremely difficult to get due to the strange licensing and varied licensing requirements that exist. I was talking to someone recently about this, and I said, they quoted one survey, and it was from every town for gun safety, and then you look at the other side, and they have equally biased polls sometimes. So I found a good study, and it's actually something. It was a study initiated by President Obama through an executive order, and it's called Priorities to Reduce the Threat of Firearm-Related Violence. It came out in 2013. It is by the National Academies of Science. It is peer-reviewed. And on that, on page 15, it says, almost all national surveys indicate that defensive uses by victims, it would be defensive gun uses by victims, are at least as common as offensive use by criminals, with estimates of annual uses ranging from 500,000 to more than 3 million in the context of 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms. So there are too many violent firearm crimes, there's no question. But the fraction, between 500,000 and 3 million defensive uses for 300,000 offensive uses in the whole country in a year, guns save lives. Going further down through that study, there's another portion where they deal specifically with public mass shootings. And their quote is, according to the Congressional Research Service, public mass shootings have claimed 547 lives and led to an additional 476 injured victims between 1983 and 2013 when that was published. That's too many. Then I looked and I said, I wonder how many people die from other random, rare things. Mass shootings are very rare events. They're sensationalized by the media, but they're very rare. So if you look at the National Weather Service, you're actually more than 2.5 times more likely to die by being struck by lightning and killed than to die in a public mass shooting in this country. That's not what you see on the news. And when you go further through the report from President Obama's commission, they address things like the fact that the media sensationalizes violence, right? And they actually deal with how susceptible the minds of children are to this violence, right? And they're seeing it every day because it is a self-perpetuating cycle, basically. But they actually attribute some of the incidents to the media basically putting it out there constantly. I also do not believe in trading a liberty for a small amount of security that is very tenuous at best. I do oppose almost all of the restrictions, the magazine capacity, lawful transport. Actually, the lawful transport of a rifle, I have a point in that it doesn't seem to exclude or provide you the ability to, let's say, transport a rifle to the airport if you're going hunting. I want to go to Montana. I'm a felon if I do that, according to the way this is written. There's a lot of things there that aren't really proper. Also, we've seen a lot of young people today that have come before us, and they're 17, 18, on both sides. There's been talk about us increasing the age of ownership for a rifle to 21. But the kids that we've had here today are the ones that we're prohibiting. They're good kids, adults. I don't support it. I shot when I was 18. I could never support that. I did want to talk a little bit. There's a lot of other bills, that I won't get into. One of them is that we're talking about restricting concealed carry by a permit holder on school grounds. I live diagonally from a school about 100 yards, and so I pass it going to and forth to work, if I go for a walk, constantly. It's right next to a park. When I bought my house, after I bought it, I found out that someone got off the highway, picked the first street, picked the first park, abducted a girl, and murdered her. And so the park is named after her, and it's adjacent to a school. And I was coming home from work last fall on my motorcycle, and there was a guy slumped up against a telephone pole, and I thought he might have been dead. So I stopped to see if I could render aid, and sort of said, tried to browse him, and he wasn't dead. So he woke up, and he started to come at me. And I called the police right away. And the first thing they asked me is, you have a concealed carry permit, do you have your gun on you? And I was adjacent. I was backing up at this point, and he was coming across the street at me. And I backed up basically adjacent to school property at this point. And everything was fine. The police showed up, and life was good. I think he was high on something, according to the police, and he was a frequent flyer. This was not a, uncommon thing. And he didn't exhibit any gun violence. He was just a little violent and obviously high. But the incident ended, and there was no involvement of firearms at all. But in the light of these recent shootings, I was thinking about the fact that the police were great. They got there in about 3 minutes. It was amazing. The whole school shooting we've been talking about a lot, took 6 minutes. And if you're telling me as a concealed carry permit holder that if I saw that guy and he had a gun, but he was 4 feet further onto school properties, that I'm not to stop him, I don't want to get involved. You're telling me I can't get involved to stop this when I could, and the police won't be there for 3 minutes or 6 minutes, or we don't know how long? I mean, they're going to do the best they can, but I really question wisdom of what is being proposed there. That's actually it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
Sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My speech starts with a small clipping from the Huffington Post, in which the FBI says it failed to act after receiving tips about the suspected Florida shooter. And they go on to say, someone contacted the FBI public tip line on January to alert of the shooter, and they called in and they were talking about his behavior and the desire to kill people and potential of him conducting a school shooting. According to the FBI, under established protocol, the information provided by the caller should have been assessed as potential threat to life. The information should have been forwarded to the FBI Miami field office, where appropriate investigative steps would have been taken. And they simply close by saying, we have determined that these protocols were not followed. These are the people that we are supposed to expect would be protecting us. These are the people that once our weapons are taken away from us, we're beholden to. Okay? I don't think I want to be in that position. I would urge you to forget about the weapons ban, the magazine ban, and to do nothing with these red flags unless it is going to be to help to do what the FBI should have been doing in the first place. Taking into account these reports and acting on them. The laws are already there. They did not follow it. Someone here said today that if we had had a weapon ban in Florida, that these people would not have been killed. That is not what went wrong. It was simply because the FBI did not do their job. The Sheriff's Department did not do their job. In the case of the Florida school, the coach, one of the coaches in the school, I assume there were more than one, had been in some kind of a security position in addition to being a coach in the school. But from everything that I've read, he was not armed. Instead, what he did was use his body to protect these kids and got killed. That is one of the stupidest things, not on his part, but the requirement that he not have a weapon if he's going to be in that capacity. They killed him. The system killed that man, as they did other teachers who did the same thing to protect these children. That is just incomprehensible. I just cannot digest it. The Constitution of the United States is almost cast in stone. And the reason I say it's almost cast in stone is because the forefathers saw that there would be a need from time to time to make changes in it. And to that end, they gave us one and only one way to do it. Okay? And I urge everyone who doesn't know the process to read the Article 5 of the Constitution. And lastly, I'm going to make this short. The Second Amendment was included into the Constitution as a way to assure that tyrants would pause before trying to subjugate the people. It was not enough to state that we had the right to keep and bear arms, but they also saw fit to include that those rights shall not be infringed. In the quest to run around the Constitution, what we're doing is infringing on those rights. Should such a tyrant raise his head, the people would not have anything left after you finish with us to make changes and bring things back in order, as was intended. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Justin Patterson Schmidt. Before I start, I would like to, and wish he was here, to call out Senator Metz for lambasting that young gentleman there about ignorance. For him to say that it was that he stopped listening because he didn't like the message was exactly what he was talking about, the ignorance. The ignorance that is reek in this state, that the whole knee-jerk reaction and not actually looking at the causes and doing root cause analysis and thinking law after law after law is going to stop a person who is by definition not going to follow the law. So I just wanted to call him out on that, and I do not like when that happens. And I think that no matter what side you're on, It is everyone's job to listen and not shut out because of you don't like the message. So I would like to thank the Founding Fathers for having the opportunity to speak here. Thank them for having the fortitude of standing up for what's right and just, and the fortitude to dispose the agents of tyranny with blood, sweat, and tears. And we hear again another knee-jerk reaction where this body, the Redcoats, and the organization that had to change its name due to all the agents of the organization molesting children, raping, and other sexual deviancy, all paid for by big money, Bloomberg, and George Soros. Here we don't have any funding. All of us with yellow shirts are all true grassroots. Came here, took work off. We don't have any big money. All of our founders believed with every ounce of their body that we have unalienable natural rights. Unalienable natural rights. Given to us by our creator or creators, whatever you believe, for just existing. As such, government cannot grant, nor can they remove these rights. They believe these rights were numerous, and there was a lot of argument between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists about even including the Bill of Rights, where some believe that if you list them, government will take that as a challenge to try and remove them. Or say, because it's not listed, you don't have that right. So I think this is where we are here today, is government believes they can either change, ignore, or otherwise say we don't have a natural right because of some safety issue. They believe, furthermore, they believe, as John Locke wrote, which is what our system is actually based on, that when such situations exist, that the rights of man are usurped by government, it is not only man's natural right, but their duty to dispose of the tyrants and restore the natural order of their rights. So why would government usurp natural rights of the people anyway? Power, money, and control. A mental derangement syndrome in which these people seek out positions of power and attempt to get more power, more money, and more control. These people are so narcissistic, they believe that they should have all the power because others cannot govern themselves or their own lives. A big problem is the people have been brainwashed. So many as to follow the footsteps of Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. Exactly what they did is they brainwashed the people, took over the education, and then took the guns so they could no longer defend themselves. This very government did that during Wounded Knee. And everyone says that the latest Las Vegas was the most deadliest. It wasn't. It was Wounded Knee. And that was because government, the U.S. government, tried to take away the guns of the Indians. And we know that that whole period was one of the worst periods in U.S. history. One that we could probably never, ever recover from. This state is one of the most corrupt in the nation by many measures. It's full of crooks, mob wannabes, mentally insane, and no doubt a lot of other crimes. One of the highest taxed, yet we have the worst roads, the worst education, and I can go on. The crux is the masses are so brainwashed. They will stop at nothing to take away the natural rights. There's no pocket too deep, no lie too big, and no favor too much, that they will stop at nothing. Instead of violating the natural rights, why doesn't this body actually look at the real problems? Look at the root causes actually do root cause analysis. Write your little fishbone charts. I would love to see those instead of just blanket legislation trying to remove rights. You all took an oath to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution, and some here have violated that oath. As a Norse pagan, I know there's a special place for those that violate oaths. Oaths are one of the most sacred things we have, and the Constitution is an oath between the people and the government. Additionally, we're saying that guns are the problem. Nobody's looking at all the other things, the knives, the mental health, that we have a huge problem. I'll tell a little story that I have had chronic migraines, cluster headaches since I was an infant. I've tried doctor after doctor, no avail, they'll never be solved. This latest one I went to actually put me on a psychotropic drug. None to say that it did a lot of bad things to me. Raised my blood pressure, heart problems, movement problems, and I was starting to see some mental problems. I was starting to see that it was eating away at me. These are the issues. Big Pharma pushing all these pills for people that have mental issues and not actually getting the real help that they need. The real help that a therapist or a psychiatrist can give them instead of pumping full of pills and causing these. If you look at any of the mass shootings that have happened recently, you will see a lot of them have been on these drugs. And these drugs cause a lot of problems. And I know now firsthand how many problems they can cause. So another problem is this state has the uncanny ability to release some of the most violent criminals back into society. We have plea deal after plea deal from gangsters and other criminals committing crimes with firearms. Firearm crimes get pled away, either completely away or to misdemeanors. So they kind of drop off the screen there. Another problem is our parole system. We release people out after their sentence or before their sentence if they have good time. However, society says, we still don't trust you, so we're going to keep your rights. So why, if you believe that they can join society again, but in the same breath said they can't be trusted? That is also something that needs to be looked at. If you can't trust somebody to be in society, they shouldn't be in society. So I'll close with this as a warning. Your first duty is to the U.S. Constitution, then to the Rhode Island Constitution when it does not conflict with the U.S. Constitution. And then and only then is it to your constituents if it does not conflict with the first two. As a Norse pagan and a true American, I will gladly, without equivocation, die for the Constitution. I know, in the end, that the Valkyries will carry me up to Valhalla, and I'll be honored for standing for something that I truly believe in true justice and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Michael Bedford. This is going to be a tough one. The writing's tough. Alex, something that begins with an F. And Jennifer Moffett. Sorry, there was no way it was not gonna. When you announce it, I'll repeat it so they think that I said it right the first time. Sir, we'll start with you. Good evening and welcome.
Testing. Thank you, Senators. I do appreciate your attention. I know it's late in the hours, but you honor me with just sticking with me just for a few minutes. I had a whole laundry list of things I wanted to talk about because, namely, you had 17 bills that I really couldn't get behind. A lot of the message has already been delivered, so I'm going to skip right to the point. The one bill that I wanted to bring to your attention was the assault weapon ban and the 10-round limitation. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Texas, there was an individual that also carried an AR-15 and actually stopped a guy that had just committed an atrocity at a church where I believe up to 26 people were murdered. He also had an AR-15. So did the folks down in Parkland. The gentleman down in Parkland had an AR-15. So when you have somebody or the same weapon being used by two different people and two different outcomes, I'm trying to figure out, and I've been listening to testimony all night, where's the common sense in going after a weapon as a tool or an instrument when clearly it's the wielder's intention that drives the outcome. It's not the weapon. The weapon is just a tool. So I don't really understand that. And as much as I've tried to really get to the bottom of that, I've listened to a lot of folks with competing ideas, and I still am not able to bridge that gap. I think the intention for this bill might have started out as well intended, but I think it's misinformed at best. Furthermore, I'm concerned about this bill effectively making it illegal to 3/4 of the type of firearms that are commercially available. And how would that pass the constitutional test? If 3/4 of the firearms could be constituted as being banned, whether it's not just a firearm, not just an assault rifle, so-called assault rifle, it's a pistol and shotguns with certain characteristics. We heard from Frank earlier today at the beginning of the session. He said about 3/4 of the weapons out there would fit under this description. And I can tell you personally, all of my weapons would be considered illegal under this definition of what an assault weapon would be. So if we are here saying that we don't want to trample on the Second Amendment rights, but we're willing to ban over 3/4 of the commercially available weapons out there, I don't see how you can say that in the straight face. That clearly is a mutually exclusive goal, the way this bill has been defined in terms of what's actually being excluded. There was a question asked, and I believe there were statements made earlier about why is the AR-15 a commonly used weapon in mass shootings? And I think somebody tried to say, well, because they're going to conduct mass shootings, it's a weapon of choice. I want to cite to you a particular statistics, and again, take it for what it's worth. It's from the National Shooting Sports Foundation that stated that in 2016, 61% of rifles that were sold that year were the AR-15. So is it the fact that the AR-15 is the weapon of choice, or is it the fact that there are that many AR-15s and it's a weapon of many choices for both hunting, self-defense, and it's ubiquitous? It's something that's available everywhere. So to sit there and blame and say the AR-15 is the thing in common, I think is a leap too far, especially when you look at the fact that of over 61% of the rifles being sold in 1 year is this particular weapon. I want to switch the attention to the idea that we should limit the magazine size to 10 rounds. And I don't know where 10 rounds came from. Maybe that was just an arbitrary number we pulled out of our butt, but it certainly is out there. And I want to bring to your attention that, and I don't know if this is common knowledge, but there was a senator down in Florida that said that the gentleman that was involved in Parkland was using 10-round magazines. So clearly, in that case, a 10-round magazine really wouldn't have a zero or net zero effect on that outcome. So I understand the idea that we want to limit the effect or the impact of a potential mass shooting. I believe that's the premise of this law, is that if somehow you had to switch your magazine, that split second is going to give somebody the ability to intercede. It's going to allow them to, that pause, because they're all ducked under some table or anything, to throw a book at them, tackle them, or otherwise return fire if that's the situation. But anybody that's actually fired a weapon and has switched magazines knows that it's about 2 seconds, maybe 3. And yeah, maybe you can get in there, but there's been zero evidence that has been provided that showed that a mass shooting was stopped when somebody was changing their magazines, by somebody projecting some kind of force on them during that split second. So we have a magazine limitation bill that's being presented as a solution, but yet there's no evidence to suggest that solution would have any efficacy whatsoever. Let me tell you a real life situation on how that same ban or that same restriction could have an equally, for me, negative effect, is that when I'm in a defensive situation, and I think this was asked last year by, I believe one of the senators, I forget the name, how many rounds is necessary? How many rounds is necessary to defend yourself? To me, there's only one answer to that. All of them. So limiting the magazine size is only going to have me have to switch my magazine out in the middle of a defensive situation. So it puts my life at risk. And at this time, you've got somebody that's actually engaged where I feel my life is actually threatened. So I understand we want to limit the impact of mass casualties, but this is a misguided bill if there ever was one. And I vehemently oppose both that and the assault weapon ban as a violation of my ability to defend myself and my family. I want to stop talking about bills and just address the committee, if I can, directly, and not really in the context of a particular bill. But somebody had made this statement that we wanted a bipartisan approach. We wanted to balance the need to have safety with not wanting to trample on rights. I believe that's the common theme I heard from many of you senators tonight, is that we want to find that balance. I find that disingenuous at best, and here's why. When I enter in a negotiation with somebody, or I want to enter in a negotiation or look for real solutions, I surely don't start out with 17 ways to make them a criminal. And I feel that your first hand or your first play at it is, let's put a bunch of things that will criminalize activity that I do as a law-abiding citizen, and you expect me to believe your intentions are to find a nonpartisan answer to this horrible problem. I can't see that, I cannot have that leap of faith. So if you really want a solution or a set of solutions that get to the core of the issue, I think the best approach is not start out with 17 ways to make me a criminal and get yourselves out of whatever echo chamber there might be and talk about real solutions. Not the feel-good solutions you propose just because Connecticut did it. Sweet Jesus. I mean, just because somebody else does it. How many times we've told our kids, don't do something just because somebody else does. But yet we have no evidence that shows any direct efficacy, but we're willing to promote those same policies here in Rhode Island. I don't understand that. So if you really want to look at solutions, then really bring people in that can answer those problems. The last thing I'll mention here is I do have a child. He doesn't like to be called a child anymore. He's a junior in high school. We live in Lincoln, so he attends Lincoln High School. I am concerned as a parent, like everybody else that's commented here, about what school safety means to them. I mean, there's a lot of hysteria in the media. There's a lot of things that are just being blown out of proportion, but there's a real issue here. I honestly think that if you wanted to solve that problem, solve the problem. Don't go roundabout looking at how you can pretend you're going to take criminals or weapons from criminals that aren't going to be turning them in and find ways to make folks like myself or law-abiding citizens criminals ourselves and really solve the problem by going after the school. If you want to make sure that school is secure, it's not like this is a rocket science, folks. The TSA has been doing it to airports for a long time now. Every bank that you go to has secured their location. We know the blueprints to make our schools safe. It involves police officers. It involves bulletproof glass. It involves the layers of protection that the one woman was mentioning. There are ways to do this that does not involve infringing on Second Amendment rights. And the question came up, well, how do you pay for all that? You know, that's a lot of money. I get it. That's a sensitive topic. I can assure you, if you propose a bond, or the representative propose a bond, or some way at the local level to pay for those improvements to our schools, you would have resounding support amongst all parents and maybe all members of that community. I don't think I would ever hear myself saying I want to be taxed more. Clearly, I don't think it's a new one for me. But in this case, if that's what it takes so that we focus on the real issue and get beyond this partisan discussion about banning guns as the answer to everything, then that's what I'm willing to do. And I hope you are too.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good morning. I've been avoiding that for a while, but I feel like I got to give in now. Welcome.
Hello, Senators. Thank you for your time. My name is Alexander Fandetti. I air from Wakefield, Rhode Island. My family tree goes back to the original settlers here in Rhode Island, the Dowdys, the Tafts, the Woods, my father's side, the Fandettis and the Casquillas, are only about 6 or so generations. So we've been here for a while. Allow me to get to my notes. My points tonight are, this morning, excuse me, are that my fellow citizens have gone over their perspectives, their points of view, their significant datums that push their point forward, their yays or nays. Now, and pretty much everything I could say was just a repeat of them, and I'm not going to waste your time, and I have a test tomorrow, so I have to review for that. So what I'm going to give you is some data that I find is not usually brought to the surface or known to be out there to be taken in. When I vote, my perspective is this, is that if I see anything that involves psychiatry or psychology, I take a closer look at it. Because my history with psychiatry and psychology is that the psychiatrists and psychologists that I've spoken with, that I've interviewed, that I've seen videos of, they will blatantly state that, yeah, there's really no science behind the mental disorders. It's the DSM, and it tells us what the illnesses are. So when it comes to, I know this is a really touchy topic, because there was a lot of people on antidepressants and psychotropic drugs, and in the effects, not the side effects, the effects of the drugs, it lists psychosis and hostility towards oneself and others. And historically, all of these shootings have involved, all of them, have involved individuals that were seeing a psychiatrist or psychologist, or had been seeing one, were on psychotropic drugs, or had been on them in the past. So that, not the item that was used to strike fear or to murder, was not, yes, that those were similar, but the actual deciding similar thing is that they were on psychotropic drugs. And it is clearly stated in the effects of the drugs that it causes this. But that's not a big talking point, and that's why I bring that forward today. The terminology is pushing away from that as well, and if there's... My point short is that the target that we're going after is the incorrect target, no pun intended. The dangerous item is the drugs themselves, and it's kind of the situations of firearms and drugs are kind of close cousins when it comes to this stuff. And that's why, in my humble opinion, that it's not a gun problem. It's a drug problem. Because if you took the drugs out of the situation with what I've gone over in my several years involving my research and losing friends and loved ones' respects, because I bring this up and I immediately get a disconnect from them, is that the common denominator is the antidepressants, and that needs to be looked into. And I request that of you to look into that when you make your decisions and when you decide. I recommend a particular website is there are psychiatric or psychological watchdog, non-political. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's called CCHR, Citizens Commission for Human Rights.org or .com. And they've been going up against this for a long time. And when they were voting on the DSM-5, I was there in Philadelphia. And hostility and the anger that came off of these doctors was unbelievable. It was surreal, and it sticks in my mind when I make decisions. So I just wanted to read you a little bit of an article. It's a paragraph of one of their articles on the website. It says, CCHR, International's investigation in school violence reveals that at least 36 school shootings and or school-related acts of violence have been committed by those taking or withdrawing from psychiatric drugs, resulting in 172 wounded and 800 killed. And other school shootings, information about their drug use was never made public, neither confirming nor refuting if they were under the influence of prescribed drugs or undergone other behavioral therapy. At least 27 International Drug Regulatory Agency warnings have been issued on psychiatric drugs being linked to mania, violence, hostility, aggression, psychosis, and homicidal ideation, thoughts of or fantasies of homicide that can be planned. So that's been the link through all of these shootings that I've witnessed in my youth up to the present day. And one other point I want to make is that I recently went back to college. In 07, I dropped out due to financial reasons, but I just recently went back into college, and it's great. I'm doing very well. I'm pumped. I want to work at Hasbro. I'm going to represent this state. But when it comes to the point of me even having to question that the tool that I would use to defend my life, which is worth more than anything, you cannot put a price on life, nor the age of the individual whose life is in jeopardy. Taking away or inhibiting in any way, shape, or form an individual's ability to defend themselves is a crime. I see that as a high crime. And the fact that it had to be put down on parchment and made into a recognizable, stable datum for this country makes it clear of how significant this is. And that's the majority of what I have to say, and I request of you that you look into that, because CCHR has a lot of data. They've been on this for decades. They've been attacked, and then it's turned around, and the people that have attacked them have backed off because the data that they have is true. So it's worth looking at.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Ma'am, good morning and welcome.
My name is Jennifer Moffett. I'm a wife, a mom, a nurse. I've lived in Rhode Island most of my life. I did grow up in Western New York. I grew up in the country and I live in the city, so I have a little experience with both sides of that. I actually came with a whole plan of what I was going to say, but after hearing a lot of what other people have said, I'm going to kind of change. I've made a lot of notes, so bear with me because it's a little bit confusing. But these are very charged, emotionally charged events that just happened, and we're all scared for our kids, every one of us, regardless of what side you're on. The problem is there's a fundamental difference in how we approach that. One side thinks that banning the guns is the answer, and the other side thinks that protecting our rights is the answer. So the problem is that we are going to be emotionally charged as moms and as dads and as citizens, but your job is to put that aside. Your job is to take the emotional part out of it and look at the facts. And the facts stand behind guns. They do not stand behind gun control. And that is a fact. And I've heard lots of people making a bunch of comments. And so I'm going to comment on a few of those. Somebody saying more guns equals more violence. Factually untrue. I've got a whole pack here. I won't go through them. But the FBI statistics from their own website clearly show that overall homicides in this country have declined. They're at a 50-year low. 50 years. They're at the lowest they've been. They're down 49%, despite the fact that gun ownership has increased throughout that time. People made comments about Australia. You're right. Violence is down. Gun ownership is up. Everybody talks about how they have this big gun ban. When they confiscated guns, they only took 640,000 away from them, left another 2.5 million in their hands. And since then, it has increased to over 5 million. They have guns. That's why they're protecting themselves. So the fact that you look and say, oh, they made a gun ban and now they're safer, isn't exactly a fair assessment of what has been happening there. We have to look at, again, somebody mentioned earlier, statistics can be altered to fit our agenda, but I beg of you to look at all of these facts and look at all of the situations out there. One of the things somebody mentioned, actually, a woman mentioned about mental health. And I actually found what she was talking about. It came from the American Journal of Public Health, the comment that she made. They actually said that this is actually going towards the red flag bill. I'm, as a nurse, I am horrifyingly opposed to the entire idea. The idea that we would risk our Fourth Amendment in order to feel a little safer is horrifying to me, and the few people I heard that actually mentioned the idea of circumventing due process just boggles my mind. That you would risk our liberty for something like that just boggles my mind. The idea of attacking mental health is very disturbing to me. According to the American Journal of Public Health, less than 3 to 5% of U.S. crimes involve people with mental illness. Up to 60% of mass shooters displayed acute symptoms of paranoia. However, to use Swanson's paraphrasing, basing gun crime prevention effects on the mental health histories of mass shooters knows building common evidence from uncommon things. Psychiatrists using clinical judgments are not much better than chance at predicting which individuals are going to be violent. Just because somebody has mental health issues does not mean they're going to be violent. The statistics do not bear that out, not at all. And to the idea that we're going to assume because somebody has mental health that there's a chance they're going to be violent is an abhorrent idea. And all we're going to do is scare more people away from going and getting mental health help. We've been fighting for years to encourage people to go out and get help when they have mental health illness. And all we're going to do now is scare people away. People are going to be labeled now. You're going to label them. You're going to risk people coming into your house and searching your house and taking everything away from you to protect your own family because somebody else says that you might have it. And then you have to prove that you don't, or you have to prove that you're not violent. This does not bear this out. We have to think very, very strongly before we do this. One of the things I'd like to do is put a face to gun owners. I heard a lot of people testifying, a lot of kids testifying about how they're so petrified of the idea of a gun being in their school. I hate to break it to you, but they wouldn't even know they were there. A concealed gun owner are all around you. They're all around you. They're in your grocery stores, they're in your banks, they're all, and you don't even know. The kids wouldn't even know. And I'll tell you right now, I've spent the last year with an incredible group of people that I've met. Almost all of them conceal carry. They all own guns and shoot. They are the most responsible people I have ever met in my entire life. And I would want them protecting my child all day, every day. What you have to go through to get a concealed carry is extensive. These people, I've actually been surprised with how incredibly responsible they are. They are so cognitive of all of the gun laws and all of the things that they need to do to be safe. They're aware that if they're going into an unsafe situation, they think about that first. These people that everybody has lumped together in a group, there are friends, there are neighbors, there are nurses, there are doctors, there are lawyers, they're all genres of life. These people would give their life to protect you, not even knowing you. And if they choose to protect my child in a school, I am all for it. And I hate to, there's an interesting thing I don't think anybody has stopped to think about. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm not going to arm a teacher. There's a lot of other people in a school. There's maintenance men, there's principals, there's nurses. I'm a nurse. I'd be more than happy to do that. There's a lot of other people besides teacher that could be prepared, people that are willing to step in and do this. And the other thing is that the idea of knowing that somebody in that school might be armed, it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 100. The idea, that is going to deter people. Because I can guarantee you these shooters are cowards. They're not going into banks. They're not coming here to the courthouses. They're not going places that are protected. They're going to soft targets. They're going into churches and schools. And if they thought for 1 minute that there was even one person in that school that might shoot back, they won't go in. I can guarantee you that. And I would be perfectly fine with my daughter. And I'll tell you what, my daughter, she's 16. She wanted to come today. She would have been the only child in this place that would have had the same opinion. She's at her job today because she got her first job and it was her second day, so she couldn't not come. She was very upset. She wanted to be here. And I can guarantee she would tell you that she would be more than happy to have any one of my friends here protecting her every day. And she would walk into that school and feel so safe and so protected and wouldn't for 1 second be worried about anything else other than getting her education. And that is what we need. We need to protect our schools, not with taking our guns away, but by bringing them in. We need to protect our children, and we have to find the right ways to do it. We have to, all of these, there's a million ways that we can do it. There are so many different ways. I wish, please, I beg of you, to look at what others, there are lots of states that do this already. This is not a good new idea. There's plenty of states out there to do it, and they're very safe, and they've had no incidents. Have you heard it? Because I'm guaranteeing you right now, if there was a problem, if a teacher had shot somebody in school and had gone rogue, we would hear all about it. There is one that just happened in Georgia, but that doesn't count because he already had mega issues and shouldn't have had a gun to begin with. He wasn't a concealed carry. He did not have that appropriately, so that shouldn't even be in the conversation. But please, look at the schools in the other states that are doing this. Look at how they've done it. It's working. Let's look at Rhode Island is one of the safest states in this country. It's one of the few things that we can brag about. And Rhode Island is showing up on the news all the time for all these things, and we're embarrassed. We're at the top of the list for all these terrible things. This is one thing we're at the top of the list for. Let's celebrate that. Let's look at what we're already doing, right? And let's do it everywhere. My daughter's school, she goes to Tollgate. When I show up at the school, I have to wave to the camera, put my ID up at the camera, let them know who I am before I come in. My daughter says she feels pretty safe at her school. She knows, we talked about it, she knows about all the different things that are being done in her school to keep her safe. Let's model that. Let's look at the schools that are doing it right, and let's model it. Let's look at the states that are doing it, and let's model that instead of just going to the easiest solution and just getting rid of guns. It doesn't work. We can look at all of the countries that do it, and it doesn't work. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group.
Not a question, but just a point to make that.
Yes.
I'm looking at this annual gun law scorecard, and Connecticut's ranked number 3. With all the gun laws they passed, Rhode Island is number 9. We have a B+. So we're pretty strong already.
Out of 50 is pretty good, right?
Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Dimitri Lissakatos, sorry about that, Ward Thrasher, and Sydney Monstream Quas. Willis Peter Bilderback. Okay, come on up. You have no idea. And I'll just ask, and again, I do appreciate everybody's patience. If we, could perhaps maybe try and hit the points that haven't been discussed or paraphrase even, I would appreciate that. But I do understand you guys have all been waiting here for a long time, so proceed. Thanks.
The first bill I'd like to talk about is the Extreme Protection Order Bill. I'd like to state my objection to this bill. Before I get into the objection, I'd like to thank the RIACLU for their analysis on this bill detailing the lack of due process and intrusive powers it enabled. When reading this bill, I was immediately concerned with Section 8313, the liability section. I'm worried that government agencies will be entrusted with determining someone's ability to exercise a civil right. The potential for mistakes and abuse by courts and law enforcement is tremendous. Let's all be honest, their track record on protecting civil liberties is less than stellar. Why is there no criminal or civil liability for acts relating to false statements or omissions that are made under oath in the affidavit section? Why is there no remedy for these violations by the state? To ensure accountability in the courts and law enforcement, any perjury or blatant omissions must be treated as a civil rights violation, and the injured party should be able to file criminal charges or seek civil penalties. Will the belief that government can't be trusted to protect my rights label me as mentally ill? Are anti-authoritarians mentally ill? From what I hear from some mainstream politicians, it is, and they are. How far have these ideas permeated the justice and legal system? Will people's sanity be judged based on political beliefs? Will laws like this stifle free speech due to the fear of people being labeled mentally ill? Where does this insanity stop? Will we limit people's right to vote or exercise free speech based on judgments from law enforcement? Will we revoke driver's licenses and confiscate vehicles on hearsay without due process? I say this because that's what I see in that bill. I see violations of due process for the future. I see it violating civil liberties later on, being used, you know, if it works for guns, it may work for free speech. It may work for other civil liberties. Another thing I'd like to touch on, I'd like to talk about gun control in general. I understand that it's uncomfortable for many people to imagine a time where the people would have to raise arms against their own government. But the reality is, that's the idea behind the Second Amendment. If we want to look at statistics, and I heard a lot of statistics tonight, we need to look no further than democide. It's basically responsible for 123 million murders in the 20th century, and that's death by government. I'd like to read an article written by a prominent Rhode Island politician in 2005 entitled "The Right to Overthrow." This gentleman was not a gun owner, but I believe he understood the idea behind the Second Amendment better than most people. And he actually ran for governor. I may be on the wrong end of the gun debate, but I'm still bringing a knife to this gunfight. My position is that the Second Amendment does not relate to guns, but it has a far more visionary intent: revolution. To me, the argument that the Second Amendment is about guns completely misses the target. The Second Amendment is about the right to pick up a pitchfork, sword, or gun to either protect or restore our rights against tyrannical government. And oddly enough, tyrannical governments do not interpret this similarly. The colonists haven't survived a bout of tyranny, were in no mood to be restricted. Guns were as commonplace as spoons and necessary for daily existence. They were a daily tool, not explicitly mentioned in the Second Amendment. Has anyone proposed any good hammer amendments recently? At the founding, tyranny was a real threat. Retaining a right to keep arms, to rise up against government, is far more logical as the foundation of the Second Amendment. While we can debate whether we need to preserve or expand our Second Amendment right of revolution, the idea has been postulated for most of the 20th century that the Second Amendment is to protect or regulate guns is misguided. Whatever side you're on, gun control or gun ownership, you are wrong to think that the Second Amendment is your problem or your savior. The real issue is the change in society and how this relates to the Second Amendment. The deinstitutionalization of America in the 1960s put thousands on the street based on the theory that one is insane only if the person is dangerous to himself or others, usually proven after a mass murder. While deinstitutionalization was a victory for personal freedom and humanity, the downside is that the state, freed of its commitment to mentally deficient, failed to provide support on the outside for those released from the inside. Mass shootings, often the work of the certifiably insane, trigger a debate about gun control under the Second Amendment, when it really should initiate a discussion on how our society fails its mentally deficient. Having potentially insane people among us can be dangerous, as it was back then. Guns are an easy means for the insane to vent their frustrations. But is it the solution to take away guns or to better care for our mentally unstable? Is your answer for us to submit to more tyranny because we are allowing more freedoms? Do we still fight wars for peace? Now, there's a slight explicit, swear in here, so I'm going to bleep it out for you. I do not own a gun, as I may be dangerous to myself and others. I have used a gun. I can state unequivocally I don't see myself shooting people, even those bleeps who bring 15 items to the 10 items or less cashier. Although, as an aside, does corn count as 1 item or 12? All that said, I would shoot a tyrant with malice afterthought. I guess that means government needs to keep me happy enough not to see it as tyrannical. Either that, or take away my Second Amendment rights, or shoot me, or both. The Second Amendment is my inalienable right to overthrow my government, and that they will have to pry from my cold, dead hands. That's from Bob Healy, 2005 Motif magazine. That touches a soft spot with me. When I read that, I definitely, I could understand where he was coming from. Another issue here that I have is I was listening to testimony from the Coalition for Domestic Violence and the Protect Rhode Island Families Act. I testified on that bill multiple times in the Senate and in the House. And there was a exemption in there for law enforcement. I was extremely bothered by this. I felt that was a slap in the face to all gun owners. I mean, to tell me that an officer puts on a costume and can go to work and is automatically immune from mental illness, anger, or domestic violence is insane. And the fact that these groups who basically claim they're defending domestic violence victims would pander to a demographic that's 2 to 4 times likely to commit domestic violence is insane, in my opinion. And people voted for this, and everybody was happy, and it was basically, to me, a farce. That really bothered me, and everybody put on a big show for that legislation. It was a joke. One more thing I have to say is, having said all this, and this is a little emotional for me, I cannot continue to allow my rights to be infringed. As a matter of principle, I cannot keep redrawing my line in the sand. I hope that government understands my position and understands why I cannot comply to demands to future enslave myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson, Senators. Thank you for your audience and your endurance this morning. My name is Ward Thrasher. I'm a resident of Providence. I've been here about 5 years. I'm a prodigious emailer and have emailed the committee many times with thoughts on various legislation, so rather than rehash that. I was a university dean, taught all over the world, spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. Guns are by and large not present in Southeast Asia. Schools are attacked with knives. China went through a 10-year period that their children were being massacred at school by knife-wielding assailants. So yes, we do want to keep our children safe, but restricting guns simply makes other tools the preferred choice when somebody wants to inflict violence on a soft target. As a university dean, I had the misfortune of being the dean for the Times Square bomber. He was not a U.S. citizen, so couldn't avail himself of a firearm. He instead tried to concoct a bomb and blow up his car in Times Square. There was no indication of mental health. There was no indication of extremism. This was a person who appeared to be normal in all respects. He was very unremarkable until the night that he tried to blow up his car. So I do encourage the body to take the emotion out of the equation. We're all in mourning. Perhaps before we act on any legislation to protect our children, our societies, we may want to give pause and go through the mourning that we're all experiencing. As a closing invitation, I'm more than happy to invite any of the members of the committee to join me at a gun range and to try some guns if you've never fired a gun before, to get an understanding of what it is to fire a gun. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good evening and welcome. Morning,
Thank you,
I'm
Chairman
sorry.
Prada. Yes, good morning.
I think I'm hallucinating at this
And the
point.
rest of the members of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Willis Peter Bilderback. I'm a resident of Barrington, Rhode Island, and I'm a board member at the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. Columbine, Sandy Hook, San Bernardino, Orlando, Sutherland, Parkland. My message to you tonight is please, let's not wait until the name of a town in Rhode Island becomes synonymous with gun violence before we take action. I believe this is the 4th consecutive year I've had the honor of addressing this committee, and I've always been very appreciative of the fact that you listen to me, that you listen to everyone, and I know that even those of you who disagree with me listen to me, and I appreciate that. What I really hope this year is that you will listen to the voices of the young people who are so courageously speaking out on this issue. You're going to be hearing a lot more from them in the coming weeks and months, and my dearest hope is that you will listen to them, because this is not the Rhode Island that they want. They do not want a Rhode Island with armed teachers, by and large, and they do not want a Rhode Island in which civilians have access to weapons of war. And I'm going to push back on this notion that we shouldn't be allowed to call assault weapons, which, by the way, is a real term. It comes from the Justice Department. The Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence didn't make it up. Neither did any other gun safety group. But the idea that we shouldn't be allowed to call these weapons of war actually flies in the face of how the gun industry markets these weapons. Bushmaster, Remington, Magpul, they all market a variant of the AR-18, which they call the ACR. That stands for Adaptive Combat Rifle. Combat, that's their term, not mine. By the way, Remington's website you can find at remingtonmilitary.com. So the idea that we shouldn't be allowed to point out the fact that these weapons have their genesis in military use and are functionally very similar to what's used in the military, I'm not going to apologize for using the term weapon of war. With my testimony included an ad from Remington. They say, the ACR was initially conceived to provide today's soldier with an American-made, reliable, accurate, and mission-configurable rifle. Again, this is how these weapons are being marketed. This isn't language that I've made up to scare people. Now, the one thing that I will concede is that defining assault weapon in terms of creating effective legislation is a tricky business. And I absolutely recognize that. I also know that we have a lot of brain power on this committee, and I'm confident in your ability to find a definition that works. If you're unable to do that, Senator Metz has the 10-round limit bill. 10-round limit is very easy to understand. It's very easy to define. I wanted to say a word about mental illness, and there have been some good points raised. I think that whatever legislation we pass, we need to be careful not to stigmatize mental illness. Mentally ill, on average, are no more likely to commit crimes of violence than any other group of people. The one exception to that is suicide, which they are at higher risk of. And we need to understand that we can't fully address this problem just by addressing mental illness. The United States doesn't particularly have higher levels of mental illness than other countries, but we do have higher rates of gun violence in general, and in particular, we have higher rates of these kinds of mass shootings that we've seen. So none of which is to say that we shouldn't do anything about mental illness. We absolutely should. But we need to recognize that that is not going to be a solution in itself. We need to take a comprehensive approach. And a lot of what I'm hearing tonight is statements along the lines of, well, this bill wouldn't have stopped this shooting, this bill wouldn't have stopped that shooting. That's highly speculative, but it's also, it's not the kind of logic that we apply to pretty much anything else. I'll give you a very simple example. When I go to bed at night, I lock my front door. When I do that, I'm not under any illusion that locking my front door will keep out a professional burglar. I realize that my home could still be broken into. Why do I lock my door? Well, I don't want to make it easy for someone to break into my house. And what we're doing right now is we are making it far too easy for these kinds of mass shootings to happen. We need to address that. I also want to push back on the idea that the Second Amendment protects the right to carry guns in schools or it protects the right to assault weapons. It doesn't. I don't want to cover territory that's already been gone through. Michael Kramer ably described the 2008 Heller decision and the limits that Justice Scalia put on the Second Amendment. If you look at Maryland, they passed an assault weapons ban in 2013. That ban was upheld by the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court declined to hear the case on appeal. So assault weapons bans are perfectly constitutional. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone has to agree with the way that the Supreme Court has interpreted the Second Amendment. I didn't particularly agree with the Heller decision myself. It was the first time that a right to own firearms was established outside of the context of a militia. But my opinion on that is really irrelevant. What matters is how the Constitution is interpreted by the courts. That's the system we have. I wanted to push back also on the idea that all mass shootings happen in so-called gun-free zones, and that these are specific targets for shooters. First of all, that's based on the dubious assumption that these people behave as rational actors, which we know is not the case. What we know is that most of the time, these people seek out the locations not because there aren't guns there, but because they have some strong emotional connection or grievance with that particular place or institution. And the notion that mass shootings have only happened in gun-free zones is not borne out by the evidence. There's a 2013 FBI report that covers this. Of the 65 shootings that occurred in open spaces, in that report, at least 25 occurred in areas that do permit firearms. So this notion that mass shooters seek out gun-free zones doesn't survive contact with the available evidence that we have. I think I'm actually going to stop there. I know you've had a long night, and I appreciate the time that you've taken. I didn't take it personally. I don't have my glasses on, Senator, so I didn't even see it, but
So you just
I
turned
appreciate
yourself
the
in.
apology.
Unfortunately, at this point, it's involuntary, but we again appreciate everybody's patience
I
and everybody
understand.
sticking with us. So, are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Ramsey Davis, Stacia Heiler, Suzanne Lima Pickford.
Dan left.
Okay. Craig LeBeau. Sir, we'll start with you. Good evening and welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all. I appreciate your time and your attention. It's quite amazing. My name is Ramsey Davis. I'm a resident of Cranston. I've lived in Rhode Island since the 1970s. I'm speaking in support of Senate Bills 2493, 2319, and 2289, and I timed this in under 4 minutes, so hopefully I can beat that. I served in the U.S. Marine Corps as an infantry radio man and an interpreter in Vietnam. During one of my very first experiences in combat, our platoon was pinned down for hours by North Vietnamese snipers. Every time a single shot was fired, a Marine lay dead. Our corpsmen and many other comrades were killed that day because of a military assault weapon. Although the rifle had the capacity to fire as an automatic weapon, only single shots ran out with deadly effect. This same style weapon is available today for an 18-year-old to purchase in Rhode Island. Banning military assault-style weapons, as in our neighboring states, is not enough. This was attempted in 1994 at the federal level. The gun manufacturers skirted the ban by modifying the weapons to meet the regulations and produce more semi-automatic military assault-style weapons. The manufacturers are able to bob and weave their way around the regulations. You've heard that a number of times tonight. The Providence Journal recently published a list of close to 100 military assault-style weapons available in Rhode Island. Machine guns, bazookas, flamethrowers, and grenade launchers are banned. Why not assault weapons, as in our adjoining states? Mark Patinkin had an article in the Sunday paper last week you might have read. He went to a shooting range. That's great. So allow assault weapons at shooting ranges, and folks can experience that if they want to. As an infantryman under enemy fire, the moment of greatest anxiety was the necessity to change my rifle's magazine. Not only was there the element of time, but the knowledge that this is when the weapon was more likely to jam. So it takes 3 or 4 seconds to change the magazine, but every time I went to change that magazine, there was terror in my mind that that thing wasn't going to work again. Limiting the number of rounds in a magazine to 10 or less is essential. The removal and changing of a magazine is a moment of pause and possible jamming of the weapon that gives potential victims an opportunity to neutralize the shooter. Duck hunters are limited to 3 rounds. Why should a terrorist have access to 50-round magazines while hunting people? It is time for the privileges of the minority to be modified rather than the rights and safety of the masses. Please ban military assault-style weapons and place a limit on the number of rounds in a magazine. I have been a teacher for 31 years as well, and our only grandchild starts kindergarten in September. I personally know we don't need more guns in schools other than by police and peace officers. If more guns were the solution, then America would be a much safer country, or would be the safest country in the world. America has 270 million firearms. We represent 4.4% of the world's population, and yet we have 44% of the weapons that exist in the world. That's almost half the weapons in the world. I experienced as a teacher years ago an incident with a handgun that was pulled out in my presence and the presence of a student of mine. That individual had a concealed carry permit, and he was able to do that. This fellow pulled myself, I was out of Vietnam 10 or 15 years, pulled myself and the student into his office, closed the door, pulled a .45 out of his drawer and started waving it around in a threatening manner because he thought he could make a point with his student who was having difficulties in the school. He was a concealed carry permit holder. Now there's a perfect example of many why we do not need more guns in our schools. I know there's a closing here. Please, folks, consider these bills for the safety of my only grandchild and the thousands of other students in this great state of ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Stacia, good morning. Welcome.
Hello? Okay.
Buttons up.
Thank you for your time. Senator Lynch, you run a great committee. I appreciate the way you handled it, and I appreciate the ones that are still here, the senators. Thank you very much. I wanted to stick it out and hear and go through what you go through, because I've been doing this for a few years, and I come to the committee meetings, and I'm listening, and I'm watching closely, very closely. And I don't mean for you to take offense to this. I know that many of you are attorneys. You're well-educated people, and what or even former state trooper, right? So, the last time I remember coming here was after Sandy Hook, and then I see we got all these bills again after we see, every time we see this mass school shooting, this knee-jerk reaction legislation. I just don't understand it, why, when we have some very educated legislators. If I could just touch base, and I'm going to keep it short, I promise, but I wanted to sit here and listen so I can address some things. First of all, what you saw today was over 30, from what I got word while I was sitting here, I've been here for 12 hours with you, over 3,200 people showed up today. The majority of them were wearing yellow. And what that shows you is that the Second Amendment community is very concerned. I don't think we've seen, I talked to the fire marshals, they said they've never seen a turnout like this. They were actually concerned about capacity today. And we all were well behaved. We were very good to work with. So you can see that, and from both sides of the political aisle, Republican, Democrat, this is a big issue. For your constituents. We see what's going on. There's about 45 gun clubs across the state, well over, I'm guessing at least 10,000 members. Whether or not we shoot recreationally, we just practice, or for sporting, youth sporting, adult sporting, we're out there. I heard testimony about what Dick's Sporting Goods did, and they took a stance. I saw some more knee-jerk reactions from some big businesses trying to make a stance. I can tell you that the local gun shops, they've been jam-packed, selling off the shelves since Dick's Sporting Goods made their decision. And NRA membership actually increased since the Parkland incident. As far as this red flag bill, I was reading the ACLU's statement. I don't normally back the decisions of the ACLU. In this case, I do. They put out a 14-page analysis, and they put out some bullet points of their concerns, and I'm right there with that analysis. I think it's egregious legislation, and there's just way too many. I mean, it's just going to completely impede upon the rights of a lot of good law-abiding citizens. As far as looking at what happened in Parkland, after it happened, I think, like many of us, we all sat around the dinner table and we had some heart-to-heart discussions. What do you think? And then more news started coming out about just how bad of a situation that was, from not only the shooter Nicholas Cruz, the complete lack of law enforcement. There were red flags for years on that guy, and basically, they want us, they say, see something, say something. People were saying something, and law wasn't acting on what the people were seeing and reporting. This is a big problem. And then it led, unfortunately, to that situation. I don't understand how he just managed. We secure our schools, like that other lady said. She has to wave her card in front of the camera. We should secure our schools and make sure they are secure and safe. If teachers or any school staff chooses to carry, they should be allowed to carry. And I find it very concerning. I heard a lot of it tonight, where concealed carry holders are demeaned, constantly demeaned. I know concealed carry holders. I know people who go to the range that probably have been shooting longer and put in more hours than local law enforcement. I can guarantee you of that. If any of you would like to come to the range, I'll tell you what range I go and practice at with my husband. Please come and shoot with us. I don't know how many of you have been to the range, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what an assault weapon is. You've heard it. I'm not even going to get into it. Okay, when I saw the list of the assault weapons ban, like many of us, our jaws dropped. I just can't even believe that that legislation was put out by well-educated people and people who've actually served in law enforcement. It's very concerning to me. As far as, getting back to the students that were here too, I really want to see kids. There's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing what happened when you see kids getting killed in schools. This has been going on, unfortunately, for a long time. I can tell you when I was in high school, I'm going to give away my age right now, okay, in the 80s, we were going to school back then. I don't ever remember, I don't know about the rest of us, but the one thing that stands out to me when I was in high school was when the space shuttle blew up in the sky. That's the one thing that stayed with me forever. They didn't talk about it on the news. There were, I think, 16 shootings in the 80s, 16 mass shootings in the 80s, from 85 to 89. I don't ever remember it being, exploited in the media the way that it has been lately over the last few years. So it's concerning when we see that kids find firearms to be scary. They find more guns in schools to be scary. I guarantee you, if Senator Miller, who owns his bar in Providence, I would think, I don't know if he carries, but I would think he'd be most appreciative, God forbid, if somebody walked into his bar, okay, opening up on innocence, that there would be at least one person there who was concealed carrying, if not himself, to put that person down. And another thing I didn't hear tonight is all of these mass shootings, what do they have in common? You all know the answer. What do all of the mass shootings, I know you can answer me, that's fine. Whether it was in...
We're actually not,
Okay.
if you could just continue to testify.
Okay, great, thank you. All of these mass shootings, what they have in common is all of the people that were either in a church, in a school, in a club, were all completely defenseless. That's what they all have in common, and everyone seems to completely overlook this. There was one I can tell you this right now, I know people that are willing, concealed carry holders are willing to put their life on the line. Me personally, I wouldn't hesitate to go into a school, unlike the 4 deputies in Florida who waited outside, okay, for 4 hours before backup showed up while people were getting killed. I would have gone in, but that's just me. I can assure you of that. So, but if there was this is what stops bad people with guns. This is why we wear these T-shirts. Gun control doesn't work, because it doesn't. Good people who abide by the law, who go to the range and practice, put hours and hours and hours in and take it seriously, we'd be the first ones to put a bad guy down, because we're the first responders, the concealed carry holder. That's who's gonna take them down. So, let's see, I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, as far as this whole, mental health, this is just, you look at Stephen Paddock, there was not one red flag, not one. There's no way you could have stopped a guy like Stephen Paddock who just came out of nowhere. And then you have another guy like Nicholas Cruz who had red flags left and right, still couldn't stop him because they didn't enforce the law. You look at the number of mass shootings. No one talks about the number of these shooters and these kids that they go and they get treatment, or whether it's an adult and they get drugged up. They're put on anti-anxiety medication, antipsychotics. These medications probably cause more damage to people's minds than I know they cause more damage to people's minds than you can imagine, because they end up committing, mass shooting atrocities. And I'll just end it at this. Look at the recent case in Oklahoma with the mother and the daughter in the liquor store. And the armed robber came in, and they had 2 firearms underneath the register. And the mother, if you look at her interview on the news, I believe she went through 6 rounds very quickly. She couldn't put the guy down. He kept coming at them. He actually went out the door full of bullet holes, came back in, and then the daughter was shooting at him as well. And it took well over 10 rounds to get that one guy down, but 2 handguns with more than 10 rounds. So this whole 10-round thing, that's a whole other, you're just wasting your time. I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell you straight out. You can quickly switch those magazines faster than you can imagine. So thank you for your time. That's just the feedback that I wanted to give, and just know that the Second Amendment community, we're watching, we're looking. I'm very active online. We look at this very closely, and we're going to continue to be here and to let you know that this is, there's another solution. Don't keep coming after us. Go after the low-hanging fruit. And, and it's just a matter of enforcing the laws and securing the schools, and allow concealed carry holders, have more respect for them, because we really can, make a big difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I had a lot to say coming into this, but hearing some of the other testimony, I'd like to just refute some of the statements made. The gentleman from the last panel quoted a
Tell us your name,
2013. Say again?
No, I didn't hear your name. And
My name is Craig LeBeau. I'm from Tiverton, Rhode Island, lifelong resident of Rhode Island. The gentleman that was up here before quoted a 2013 FBI report to try and debunk the theory that mass shootings were happening in gun-free zones. If you take what he says fact, he stated there were 113 shootings, and 25 of those were in a gun-friendly zone. Last time I checked, 88 shootings is a lot more than 25. Over 3 times as much happened in a gun-free zone. So if we're going to talk about shootings happening in gun-friendly zones, the numbers just aren't there to support that theory. The gentleman to my far left, thank you for your service, first of all. Secondly, the U.S. military did you a huge disservice and trained you very poorly. If in a time of combat, you can tell the difference between semi-automatic fire and automatic fire. Anybody who's been in a high-stress situation like that will know that it's a very difficult thing to recognize. Also, the idea that changing his magazines was very difficult. Under that stress, maybe it was, but as a member of the U.S. military, you should have been trained very well in changing your magazines. I mean, the majority of us sitting here and who have spoke here today can change their magazines very, very, very quickly. Okay. And then he spoke on, again, the gentleman sitting to my far left, spoke on the minority rights shouldn't affect the safety and security of the majority. I think it's pretty clear in Rhode Island after tonight who the majority truly is in this state. We showed up in force. The numbers are in the thousands, and it's undisputed. It's on every